Chapter 43-46.
Wow.
This is so miraculous. Everyone exclaimed in surprise as they looked up at the slowly flowing seawater above them. Seawater gathered on top of it, and dense moisture filled the air. The surroundings were surrounded by a vast ocean. It was as if the swimming fish were sealed in a glass bottle. Through the hazy mist, they could see all kinds of fish swimming to and fro wantonly above them. Foam Chongqing looked down at the stone roulette in front of him. Green pine stone patterns were carved on it, and all the mountains and rivers could be seen. This is a transportation formation? Such a large transportation formation. Such an ancient and enormous transportation formation could only be seen in ancient mystic realms. Unexpectedly, the River of Forgetfulness had such an exquisite transportation formation. Longhorn coughed awkwardly at everyone. This transportation formation, this place can transport us to the entrance of the River of Forgetfulness City, Long Shangyun interrupted. However, it requires a large amount of spirit stones. I think we should walk there. It's not very far. Long Shangyun glanced at her elder brother's awkward expression and hastily took over the conversation. The group of Feng clan youths silently looked back at Sir Jojo, who had landed steadily and walked over hand in hand with Prince Imo. What are you all standing around for? Arbor grumpily shouted. Everywhere was damp, and her body felt uncomfortable. The little stoic lowered her head to look at her shoes that were covered in sand, and she furrowed her brows in disgust. Her husband understood her intentions and hastily said, Jojo, let's change into a new pair of shoes when we enter the city later. One with lotus flowers embroidered on it, Prince Mo added. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal couldn't hold it in and burst into laughter. Crown Prince Mo swept him a chilly glance, and the latter coughed lightly before promptly tensing up his handsome face in a deadpan manner. My Lady Saint, there's a large transportation formation here. A youth from the Feng clan grumbled. We need money to use it. Arbor stepped forward and looked down at the stone roulette. He expressionlessly pointed at the small line of words on it. You carved it? Long Huan looked at his cousin in confusion and shook his head. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This is an ancient teleportation array. How could I have carved those small words? This must have been written by the formation Grandmaster himself after he created this formation. Each teleportation costs 20 spirit stones. There was no limit to the number of people who could be teleported. And it's a one-way trip. Qing Shueshue couldn't help but exclaim, this is too much. Qing Hongsa curled her lips and looked at Long Hua. Hey, do you have to do this every time you enter the city? We usually walk there. Long Huan coughed and said.
Ha.
Qing Hongsa shrugged her shoulders mockingly. Her eyes were clearly throwing him a popper with a hint of mockery. Hey, what's with that look? Long Shangyun glared at King Hongs unhappily. It's not like we don't have money. It's just that place isn't very far. We'll reach it after walking for a while. How long will it take? Almost. Just less than 4 hours. What? Qing Hongsa exclaimed. For a moment, she thought there was something wrong with her ears. What the hell? 4 hours of walking? Why don't you go to heaven? Long Shangyun instantly felt extremely embarrassed. Her face flushed red and she said angrily, Why are you making such a fuss? Chapter 43-47. Our River of Forgetfulness is like this. We can only walk. You're in the water. You can't use that flying spirit artifact. Long Shangyun stuttered as she was stared at strangely by the group. You think this is the land route? This is the bottom of the sea. It's the space under the sea. It's different from the land route. It's restricted to flying. And ordinary land beasts might not be able to adapt to this space under the sea. Everyone looked at her strangely. A dragon youth could not help but ask, then why don't you summon a sea beast to carry us over? I don't have a sea beast. Long Shangyun flew into a rage out of humiliation. My flying bat, it's not like you haven't seen it before.
See my ass.
No sea beast. Everyone looked at her with a look that said, Why are you so lowly? Long Xiangyun was about to explode in anger. Long Huan quickly grabbed her hand, coughed and said that if there's no problem, follow. We'll set off now, about 4 hours, we'll reach the city gate. That, speaking of walking, it's not that far. Long Huan quickly added. Everyone, Sir Jojo looked at the siblings expressionlessly. Long Huan and Long Xiangyun felt their hairs stand on end from his gaze, and felt extremely guilty. What are you looking at? Long Xiangyun flew into a rage out of humiliation. This spirit stone is not spirit coin. Do you know how much 20 spirit coins are? 20 spirit stones, that's 400,000 to 500,000 spirit coins. What kind of joke was this? One teleportation cost 400,000 to 500,000 spirit coins. Even if the River of Forgetfulness Dragon Clan was rich, they could not burn their money like this. Moreover, they had to go back and forth between the land route and the sea every 2 to 3 days. Could they use the expensive teleportation array every time? Long Huan was a little annoyed, because he realized that his cousin was looking at him and the dragon clansmen as if they were small and poor. Long Xiangyun shouted in exasperation, "All right, stop talking nonsense, follow. Let's go." Arbor silently stood on the teleportation array. Mo Lian, Hechan Muxingchen, and Holy Sun Mi Yen quickly followed suit. The young men of the Phoenixes reacted quite quickly, and they all rushed into the battlefield. After entering the teleportation array, one would know. Even though the teleportation array was only the size of a wheel, there was a different teleportation space inside the array. Therefore, there was no limit to the number of participants. Could it be that this teleportation array can teleport people from an entire city? Of course not. I heard that this kind of ancient teleportation array can only teleport 100,000 people at most. That's already the upper limit. Oh, that's already pretty good. Long Xiangyun and Long Huan quietly followed the team and entered the teleportation array. They were naturally willing to freeload off the teleportation array. Between the teleportation array and walking, only an idiot would choose the latter. Hearing the sound of the spirit stones falling into the center of the formation plate, everyone felt their hearts tremble. 20 spirit stones were equivalent to 400,000 to 500,000 spirit coins. Just like that, Lady Qiao spent the money for a single teleportation without even blinking. Long Xiangyun glared at Arbor with some grief and indignation. This guy, he was obviously so rich, but in the beginning, he cheated the siblings all day long and even stretched out his hand to ask them for ship fees. Chapter 43-48. No, the 20 spirit stones that Sir Jojo spent this time, wasn't it from them? Previously, he had lost 50 million spirit coins to her. Then, he had signed a bill for 70 million for the fairy fair. All these added up to more than 100 million spirit coins. 400,000 to 500,000? What was 400,000 to 500,000 spirit coins to Sir Jojo? What was that? Arbor threw down 20 spirit stones and led the group to the gate of Forgotten River City. Looking up at the crystal-colored gate of Forgotten River City, it was like a glacier palace, presented in front of her. Arbor let out a small sigh. Wow, so rich. Everyone, this city wall is made of ice crystals. It is sturdy and beautiful. Even if a group of beasts besieged the city, I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to break this gate in a month. Arbor sighed and walked towards the gate with her little paws behind her back. She waved the bill in her hand. Remember to pay back the money as soon as you go back. Stop pretending to be poor. How poor could someone who could use so many ice crystals to decorate the city gate be? They were almost tricked by this pair of siblings again. Sir Jojo said with a cold face, 70 million spirit coins, plus 20 spirit stones for this teleportation. Not one less you have to pay by tomorrow. Otherwise, Sir Jojo could only form a temporary debt collection team and go to collect the debt.
How bad would that be?
Long Xiangyun's feet slipped, and she almost fell to the ground. She had an impulse to curse her ancestors. Did the ancestors of the Long family know that there was such a peerless weirdo among the younger generation? Long Qian smiled embarrassedly and grabbed his sister's hand. Xiangyun, exhale, inhale, exhale. Yes, slow down your breathing. She couldn't possibly anger herself to the point of fainting, right? Long Qian felt that if he wanted to get along well with this cousin of his, he must not be stingy, he must be generous, and he must be willing to spend money. Sob. Why did it feel like all of these were for the sake of spending money? Long Shangyun was speechless. She took a deep breath and exhaled. Then, she followed Long Shi to the city gate. The two mermen guards naturally recognized young Master Long, and Miss Long seeing this, they hurriedly bowed and saluted. No need to be so courteous. The two of them each took out a watercolored crystal card and waved it twice at the city gate. Everyone saw that the thin layer of enchantment that originally covered the city gate was slowly spreading to both sides like water ripples. A wide road paved with soft, yellowish-brown sand appeared in the middle of the road. It wasn't crowded even when two cars were traveling side by side. The people walking in and out of the restaurants and tea shops on both sides of the road were all mermaids and mermen with fishtails. Strangely, when Arbor walked into this city made of ice crystals, he could feel an endless amount of water spirit energy boiling in his body. The little water child was chirping nonstop in her conscience. Master Silver, there are so many water spirits. There are water spirits everywhere. Quickly eat them. All right, eat slowly. Don't be noisy. Arbor was getting a headache from the noise. The water spirit energy here was very dense. Naturally, she could feel it clearly. But strangely, in this group, there were so many water spirit masters, but none of them felt as strange as her. Ever since she entered the river of forgetfulness and stepped into the depths of the sea, it was as if she had truly returned home. She felt a trace of desire from the depths of her heart. Water spirit, water spirit, water spirit. The water spirit here was so dense. It was as if she could use it all. Chapter 43-49. This was a very strange feeling of control. It was as if once she entered the depths of the sea abyss, she was the queen of the deep sea and could control everything here. This feeling? It was truly strange. Xiao Mu turned her small head and shuffled to her eldest brother's side with small steps. Big brother, how do you feel? Feel? I feel okay. Mu Xingqian looked dazedly at his younger sister. His younger sister must be worried about whether his body could adapt to the space in the deep sea. When he was walking in the sea abyss earlier, the deeper he went, the heavier his heart and lungs felt. Fortunately, he had many defensive spirit weapons and his own strength was passable, so he didn't encounter any problems along the way. After entering the underwater city this time, it was as if he had entered another dry space. He removed the defensive barrier around him and could walk freely, so there weren't any problems at all. The little stoic expressionlessly gestured with her small hands and looked seriously at her older brother. Big brother. Standing behind them, Mo Lian and Ma Shurchen couldn't help but facepalm. Why did it feel like this pair of siblings were talking like chickens and ducks? They were talking in two completely different worlds. Big brother, you don't feel anything? The little stoic gestured with her small hands again. Younger sister, let's not beat around the bush. What do you want to tell big brother? The Foam Tribe youth on the side almost couldn't stifle his laughter. What was going on? Why did he feel like the little crown princess was inexplicably funny and adorable? The little stoic glanced at Mu Xingqian again. Big brother, watch. After saying that, her body leapt up with a so sound and flipped around in the air. The water spirit energy from all directions instantly surged crazily, as though it could topple the mountains and overturn the seas, rushing towards her side, fighting to be the first to enter her Dantian's godly ruins realm. The little water child cried out joyfully in her conscience. Oh haha, so pure, wahi, so awesome. Master Silver, dear best. Master Silver, work hard. Keep going, keep going. The little treant grumpily patted its head with its paw. Calm down. If you have such a rich wood spirit source, humph, I'll see if you can keep your composure. Hee, ha ha, ha 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 ha. Don't laugh, so sinisterly. Qiuqiu sourly spat out this sentence and didn't say anything else, leaving the little water child to go crazy. The Long siblings stared blankly at the little stoic's actions. They opened their mouths but closed them again. Big brother, Jojo asked you if you could feel the rich water spirit energy here like she did. Mu Xingqian looked speechlessly at Jojo, who was floating in the air, and waved at her. The little girl immediately landed and quickly walked to his side. Big brother? Mu Xingqian looked at her speechlessly. Jojo, Big brother didn't comprehend the water spirit. Big brother comprehended the fire spirit. Everyone was speechless. Lady Qiao Qiao tilted her head and looked at her elder brother blankly. She thought that it was the effect of her bloodline power that allowed her to feel the rich and abundant water spirit energy here. Big brother also has the bloodline of the river of forgetfulness. Shouldn't he be able to sense it? Big brother, you don't feel it? As soon as Jojo walked into this world built from ice crystals, she could sense the water spirit energy rushing toward her limbs and bones from all directions. Long Shangyun irritably interrupted her. Only you can feel it. Let's go, let's go. At this time, an old mermaid suddenly swam over. Chapter 4350. The old woman crossed her arms in front of her chest and bowed to Arbor. Following this, more and more mermen swam over. Their faces were filled with reverence as they bowed respectfully to Lady Xiqiao. Arbor was confused. Long Shangyun saw her expression and could not help but snort, reprimanding. Who asked you to show off? What did I show off about? Arbor turned back and glared at Long Shangyun, retorting, Speak human language. Long Shangyun was simply angry and amused, speechlessly looking at her. Just now you were like this and that, huh? What do you think? Where is this place? This is River of Forgetfulness, the bottom of the sea. Flying is prohibited. You. Arbor then realized she seemed to have flown up just now. There should be a large-scale space restriction at the bottom of the River of Forgetfulness, but it seemed that to her, this restriction did not have any meaning. Now, these ordinary residents of River of Forgetfulness all revered her as a deity. All of them swam over, bowing to her, their faces full of admiration. Misunderstanding. Arbor expressionlessly returned the greetings to everyone, using her eyes to glare at Long Shangyun, who was standing beside her. Why didn't you ask them to disperse? What was there to watch? She just had a whim just now, wanting to let Big Brother feel the water spirit energy that she felt. But Big Brother did not feel anything at all. It was really comical. Long Shangyun sneered and shrugged. You started it, settle it yourself. Long Yun hurriedly swam forward to smooth things over, smiling at the crowd of mermen. All right. Everyone disperse. There's nothing to see. These are our guests who came from afar. Everyone, please disperse. Young master. Before Long Yun could disperse everyone, one of the two mermen who were originally guarding the city gate quickly swam over. What happened? A large group of people came to the city gate. The one leading them claims to be Her Majesty, the Queen of City-Toppling Women Kingdom. What? Long Yun and Long Shangyun were stunned. Qing Shueshue walked forward with a face full of excitement. Really? The Queen of City-Toppling Women Kingdom is here? Are you sure? Yes. How many people are there? Long Xia asked in shock. About 3,000 people. Now, they were all crowded around the city gate. The city guard merman felt very helpless. Long Huan pondered for less than a second before he said, Invite the queen and the others in first. Don't let them enter the river of forgetfulness. An old voice interrupted Long Huan. Long Huan and Long Shangyun's expressions changed slightly at the same time. They turned around and bowed to an old woman who was walking over. Lord Prophet. Prophet Tuesday, the merfolk commoners, who were still making a ruckus, quickly turned solemn when they saw this old woman swimming over. They also bowed and saluted. Tu Xianshi held a fox-head scepter in one hand and looked at Long Yun with a serious expression. Young master, the river of forgetfulness does not take in outsiders. Arbor glanced at Long Huan coldly. She turned around and held her husband's hand. Let's go. Long Huan's heart skipped a beat. He quickly moved forward to block their path. Cousin, what is the meaning of this? The river of forgetfulness does not take in outsiders. What are we waiting for? I think you don't have the sincerity to form the Killing Heavens Fate Battle team, Arbor pointed out with a cold expression. Chapter 43:51. You even said you wanted to form a Heavenly Fate Battle team, Arbor said with displeasure. Do you want the warriors of the 3 continents to form a battle team while eating seawater and seaweed? Cousin, don't be angry. Long Shi hurriedly took a few steps forward and gave his sister, Long Shangyun, a look for her to go forward and block the little girl's path. This matter can be discussed. Prophet too didn't mean it that way, Long Shi hurriedly said. That senile prophet narrowed his eyes at Xiao Mu before unhurriedly shaking his head back. You are? Chu Yun's daughter? Mu Xingqian hurriedly took a step forward and stood in front of his sister. He looked at this senile prophet warily. Chu Yun's son and daughter are already so old. Prophet too glanced at them and nodded. Come with me. Arbor didn't react, so Mu Xingqian naturally wouldn't move either. Prophet too took 2 steps forward and saw the 2 standing there expressionlessly. They had no intention of following him at all. He couldn't help but frown and turn to the siblings. What's wrong? Mu Xingqian silently glanced at his sister. He was amused by the old man's attitude. What do you mean what's wrong? The beautiful Queen's group was still standing at the city gate. Why did this strange old woman suddenly want the siblings to leave with her? If this matter wasn't resolved, how could the siblings leave with her? Long Shi hurriedly took a step forward and said, Cousin, please don't take offense. This is our tribe's great prophet, Prophet Tuesday. The prophet doesn't mean any harm. It's just that the beautiful queen brought 3,000 disciples. I'm afraid our river of forgetfulness can't accommodate so many people at once. Moreover, most of them are ordinary commoners with no cultivation. Although I don't know how they got here, and you should have brought them here through the transportation formation. Arbor walked to Qing Xuexue and said, Let's go take a look. Qing Xuexue's eyes lit up and she nodded repeatedly. She couldn't wait any longer. Ever since devastating island sank and no trace of it could be found, she could see the sinking island day and night when she closed her eyes and heard the miserable cries of thousands of people. It was as if she could see the scene of her mother fearlessly fighting for her life. It was as if he could see countless broken limbs dancing in the bloody light. That kind of scene was too tragic and painful. Now that she suddenly knew that her mother was safe and sound, the anticipation in her heart was naturally strong and passionate. There was nothing in the world that could stop her from wanting to see her mother. The teleportation rune array was probably left behind by my mother. At a critical moment, it can save Aunt Ye's life. Arbor thought to himself, but he didn't say anything to Qing Shui. As the eldest young miss of Wang Chuan, Long Chu Yun naturally knew some of the clan's secrets. For example, a fixed-point teleportation glyph could directly teleport people to a certain place in the river of forgetfulness. It was just difficult for ordinary people to pass through the deep-sea passage. After reaching the underwater city, it was not much different from the land route outside. Perhaps the biggest difference was that the space here was different. There was no sun, moon, or stars, but there was space to simulate the scene of day and night. Another thing was the ban on flying. But for ordinary people, whether or not they were allowed to fly was none of their business. The 2 of them walked towards the city gate by themselves. 2 Shinshers' gaze darkened slightly. Chu Yun's children should be surnamed Mu, right? Prophet 2 said coldly. What's your name? Chapter 43:52. Long Huan cursed inwardly and was about to fly forward to stop 2 Xianji's reckless actions. Unexpectedly, a young merman in his 20s flew out from 2 Xianji's side and threw a ball of water at Arbor and Qing Xuexue without a second word. Qing Xuexue turned around and summoned the sword in her conscious, slashing apart that ball of water. The water mist assaulted the 2 of them, and Sir Jojo's expression instantly froze. She gently raised her hand and grabbed, and the countless droplets of water slowly calmed down in midair as if they were intelligent fairies. Strand by strand, drop by drop, the water droplets slowly contracted as if they were dancing on her fingertips, once again condensing into a palm-sized ball of water. Everyone, in the blink of an eye, they saw the little crown princess easily condense that ball of water mist into ice, shattering it into ice powder with a spread of her fingers, and then she raised her slender hand. "Get out of the way." Long Huan shouted angrily, his forehead drenched in sweat. Long Shangyun was even more agile, and she kicked that young merman's buttocks, directly sending him flying and rolling twice on the ground.
Whoosh, 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 ding, 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 ding.
The sandy ground was riddled with holes and was a complete mess. The last bit of ice sand landed beside the other young merman's tail with a whooshing sound, startling the latter into repeatedly retreating with a ghastly pale face. Long Huan and his sister looked at the little stoic with an ashen face. At this moment, over 100 young men from the Phoenix tribe had simultaneously pulled out their swords, looking like they were about to rush up and fight to the death with them. "Fuck, can you guys stop for a moment?"
Ah.
Long Huan hated that he couldn't forcefully tear at his own hair to express his agony. He had finally established a tiny bit of friendliness with his little cousin along the way, but after they messed with him like this, it was all gone.
Ah.
The young merman who originally attacked only regained his wits at this moment. He screamed in shock and repeatedly retreated while swaying his fishtail. "You actually have the cheek to scream." Long Huan glared at that young man. If looks could kill, he would have long killed this brainless fool with 1,000 cuts. Arbor raised his hand, and the strands of water spirits floating around began to condense again. Long Shangyun's heart sank, and she hurriedly tugged at her brother's sleeve. Not good, the little stoic was about to flare up. How could the Long siblings, who had interacted with the little stoic multiple times, not understand the little stoic's personality? Damned Sundra, extremely protective. She couldn't bear to see other people hurt her own people in front of her. She had such a bad temper, and she was willing to suffer because of her pride. However, her control over the water spirit was too strong, so strong that it was almost impossible to look at her directly. Long Yin took a deep breath and rushed to Arbor as if he was trying to put out a fire. He opened his arms and shouted, "Cousin, please, please stop. This is second grandpa's grandson, Long Ji. His grandfather, was his grandmother's clan elder brother. Let's see, he should be your cousin, Long Ji." Arbor glanced coldly at Long Huan, and his gaze was so cold that it made people involuntarily shudder. What the hell? Why was it that this stoic face's cold and silent words were enough to frighten people? "Sis cousin," Long Huan hastily explained, "It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Everyone, don't attack first." "Cousin, why speak so much with her?" Long Ji had already calmed down by now. Chapter 43-53. When she recalled her cowardly appearance just now, she couldn't help but feel angry. These two are the son and daughter of the traitor, Long Qian? Mu Xingqian shouted with a sullen face. "Who are you calling a traitor? You better make yourself clear." Long Ji was intimidated by Mu Xingqian's shout and stammered, "What? You dare to do it but don't dare to admit it." Back then, Long Qian teamed up with outsiders to stir up trouble in our river of forgetfulness. It caused our river of forgetfulness to suffer such great losses and was practically unable to recover for many years. If she's not a traitor, then what is she? Jojo. Mu Xingqian hastily lowered his head to look at his younger sister. Sure enough, he saw the little stoic's frosty face. Although her expression didn't change in the slightest, it was very obvious that she was so angry that her body was trembling slightly, and she actually didn't speak for a moment. Prince Emo hastily walked to her side and pulled her small hand, calling out, "Jojo." A pair of cold phoenix eyes shot straight at the person who spoke conceited nonsense. The icy murderous aura in his eyes surged, making it impossible for people to ignore. A towering aura pressed down on that youth named Long Ji. Tu Xianji's expression changed, and he hastily stretched out his hands to create a water barrier to help Long Ji out of this predicament. However, how could the Crown Prince's aura be easily dispelled by her? As soon as the two came into contact, she felt a terrifying mountain-like pressure crushing down on her, as if it could crush her old bones into nothingness in an instant. "Your Highness!" Long Huan cried out in alarm and hastily went up to stop him. "Let's talk things out, Your Highness the Crown Prince." "Your Highness the Crown Prince!" Long Shengyun also cried out. "Get down!" Mo Lian shouted angrily, and a crisp bang was heard. That youth named Long Ji suddenly bent over, and his entire body collapsed with a heavy thump. He involuntarily kowtowed with a bang, just like that. The surroundings were dead silent. The merfolk commoners all felt the heavy pressure at this time, so how would they dare to gather? They only dared to stealthily distance themselves from this place and steal glances at each other. Tu Xianji first felt the pressure on his body lighten. He turned around and saw his junior, Long Ji, in an arched position. She bent down and lowered her head. She knocked her head heavily on the ground and could not even lift it up. Looking at his fishtail rubbing against the ground, it was obvious that he was under a lot of pressure, but he was desperately trying to raise his head. However, the other party's strength suppression was quite terrifying. Not to mention raising his head, even breathing was difficult for him. Long Ji struggled with all her might and felt a sense of helplessness. He had never seen anyone with such tyrannical strength. Even when he was facing his cheap paternal grandmother, he had never felt such a terrifying suppression. At this moment, it was as if a giant mountain was pressing down on him. He felt extremely uncomfortable. His breathing was irregular, and he could feel his neck bones creaking, as if they could shatter at any moment. Long Ji, Tu Xianji, was anxious. He suddenly looked up in Mo Lian's direction.
"Stop."
"If I don't stop, what will you do?" Mo Lian stared coldly at Tu Xianji. Long Huan understood that gaze very well. Although he did not have much contact with this person, he had heard of this crown prince of the divine land. She was not a soft-hearted person. When she revealed such a gaze, it was killing intent. Long Huan's heart sank again. He hurriedly stepped forward to block Tu Xianji. Chapter 43-54. He looked mentally exhausted, but he had no choice but to put on a smile. "Your Highness the Crown Prince, please don't take offense. It was this one's cousin who was rude first. Please forgive, please forgive." Mo Lian glanced at Long Ji coldly, as if she was looking at a corpse. He actually dared to anger his wife to the point of speechlessness upon meeting her, and he still wanted to ask for his forgiveness? What forgiveness? This kind of thing should be properly taught a lesson. Things that did not know the immensity of heaven and earth had their eyes on the top of their heads. "Speak clearly," Arbor said with a chilly gaze. Long Ji's heart plummeted. He couldn't be more familiar with the little stoic's expression. Back in the imperial capital, when Shengyun angered her, she also had this expression. The little fellow's attitude only gradually eased after she interacted with the siblings for a period of time on the boundless sea. But now Long Ji really wished he could slap this Long Ji youth to death. His efforts were all in vain. Previously, he tried so hard to establish a good relationship with the little stoic. He finally eased after breaking the ice with great difficulty, but with this interference today, everything returned to the starting point. It really wasn't an easy task to pry open this stoic face's heart and get close to her. How did my mother betray the clan? Arbor looked indifferently at Long Ji, who was kneeling on the ground.
"Speak."
Long Ji struggled to crawl on the ground. Suddenly, he felt the pressure on his head lighten, and he abruptly lifted his head up. The youth, Long Ji, glared at Xiao Mu indignantly as he sneered. "What are you still pretending for? Who doesn't know that your mother, Long Chuyan, is a traitor in the river of forgetfulness?" Back then, the imperial capital's Long family branch allied with your divine province's Gu family and others to attack our river of forgetfulness and plunder our resources. Although they didn't gain anything in the end, our sea of forgetfulness suffered a great deal of damage. Why do you think we sank to the bottom of the sea? To build a city in the sea here? That's because in that battle more than a decade ago, the river of forgetfulness, merfolk suffered countless casualties. In the end, everyone had no choice but to live in seclusion and hide at the bottom of the sea to take refuge. We used to live near the Pond Lotus Sacred Realm on Leisure Island, okay? We can also see the sun, moon, and stars. We can also feel the sea breeze and hear the roar of the sea. It's all your mother's fault, Long Ji said angrily. My father died because of her. In that war, how many people lost their loved ones? How many people were forced to leave their homeland and come to the bottom of the sea? Have you calculated the vastness of the Forgotten River? How many islands have suffered? How many people have lost their homes? How can such a traitor return to the river of forgetfulness? Enough! Long Ji shouted angrily and glared at the howling Long Ji with red eyes.
There's no need to mention the past.
What do you mean by not mentioning it again? Arbor looked coldly at the crowd in front of him. What did Long Qian do? Are you trying to frame her with a crime of betrayal? She betrayed the clan? She betrayed the clan? What clan did she betray? You bunch of trash. How can you be considered her clansman? A bunch of cowards. You can't even protect your own sisters, yet you want her to bear the burden of your clan's safety alone?
Why?
Just because you guys are weaklings? Chapter 43-55. You deserve to lie in an underwater cave without sunlight for the rest of your lives. Because you deserve it. You're a bunch of bedbugs, dog poop, maggots crawling in ditches. The little stoic's pitch-black eyes revealed a trace of icy mockery. She either didn't open her mouth to scold people, or she would absolutely pick the most hurtful words to scold them. Once her venomous tongue opened, it would definitely make people feel extremely ashamed. What did you say? Long Ji was so angry that his entire body trembled. If it weren't for the clansman hugging his waist, he would have immediately pounced forward, wishing for nothing more than to tear apart this spouting nonsense little stoic. The little crown princess scoffed and said in an extremely mocking tone, Look at your current appearances. Filthy, cowardly, shameless, pretentious. People who are shameless are invincible. What Wang Chuan Dragon Clan? I think you're all the biggest jokes from top to bottom. You. Tu Xianji was also infuriated. When she saw the juniors quarreling earlier, she also wanted to go up and stop them, but she fainted from anger from the crown prince's sudden attack and the little stoic's sudden counterattack. Now that she heard the little crown princess's words again, she only felt that every word was heart-wrenching, and she was endlessly resentful. Long Ji broke free from his clansmen at once and pounced toward Arbor. The little stoic's eyes were bone-chilling as she waved her hand and roared, No one is to interfere. Mu Xingqian, who originally wanted to block the way and send Long Ji flying with a kick, could only silently retract his foot and continue to rage on the side. He watched as his younger sister charged forward like a cannonball and kicked Long Ji's chest.
Boom.
Long Ji was kicked to the ground, and his fishtail even bounced. He truly looked like a large fish that had been thrown onto a chopping board. Before she could recover her wits, she saw the little stoic pouncing straight at him and punching him in the left eye. Long Ji's eye turned black on the spot, but this was only the beginning. Closely following that, the little stoic threw a torrential left hook, right hook, uppercut, and downpercut. Her aura was fully unleashed, and the wind from her fists whistled as the shadows of her fists interweaved like a storm. Everyone saw Long Jijin being pressed to the ground like a fish and being beaten up fiercely. Long Qian was speechless. Long Shangyun. The two siblings looked at each other and cried out in their hearts at the same time, It's completely over. You can't even beat me. Serves your entire clan right for being cowardly turtles in this underwater cave for 10,000 years. Back then, it was you who sent my mother out for a marriage alliance. Have you asked for her opinion? Don't you think there's something wrong with this marriage? Have you never thought about the consequences of a marriage alliance? You filthy bugs that are rotten to the bone. How dare you speak ill of Long Qian with your cowardly looks? When Long Qian single-handedly challenged 9,000 people from Shuntian Prefecture in the lower star field, where the fuck were all of you hiding? A bunch of cowards.
Pussy. Scum.
With your lowly skills, you dare to talk about Long Qian in front of me? You're so shameless, huh? For your sake, Long Chuyan left the Mu family and gathered people to come and rescue you. What about you? What did you do in return? Traitor. Ha 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 ha. Arbor suddenly roared with laughter and kicked Long Ji, who was like a lump of mud, in front of Tu Xianji, whose expression had changed abruptly. Look at how old you are.
You are
Humans. Chapter 4356. Prophet Tuesday. Long Huan quickly stood in front of Prophet Tu to stop her from seeking her own death. In the river of forgetfulness, everyone respected her because of her identity as a prophet. But that didn't mean that the little crown princess would think highly of him. His little cousin had always been a person who did not play by the rules, who knew what kind of terrifying thing would happen if Tu Xianji went forward. After all, wasn't Long Ji, who was lying on the ground like a pile of mud, the best proof? How dare you? Tu Xianji was stopped by Long Huan and couldn't help but shout angrily.
He stared at Arbor in shock.
She had watched Long Chuyan grow up since she was a child. He was mature, steady, and determined. No matter what, he wouldn't be so brash and unrestrained. What did her daughter eat growing up? How could she be so domineering? Standing in the territory of the River of Forgetfulness, she dared to beat up the nobles of the River of Forgetfulness. It was obvious that the River of Forgetfulness did not exist in her eyes at all. In the early years, this child, Chu Yun, was still considered steady, but she did not expect that after leaving Wang Chuan, he would become even more useless. He did not know how to raise his children at all. Look at what he had taught the girl. Has your mother never taught you to be courteous to your elders and humble to your peers? Tu Xianshi sneered. Mu Xingqian was immediately enraged. You have no right to say such nonsense. If it weren't for you ignorant clansmen dragging her down, she wouldn't have been able to escape. How could his mother die so early? Now you actually have the face to talk back to my sister? Tu Xianshi was stunned, and he seemed as if he'd just woken up from a dream. He nodded slightly and said, Right, Chuyan passed away a long time ago. I'm afraid your younger sister has no one to teach her all these years, prophets. Long Huan hurriedly interrupted her and looked at her speechlessly. Why didn't he feel that the prophet's words were so unpleasant in the past? Everything he said today seemed to be inappropriate and stinging to the ears. She felt a sense of helplessness from the bottom of his heart. Even though she really wanted to pull back the little stoic's hostile mood, it was to no avail that so many pig teammates around her were useless. Long Shangyun stepped forward and held Prophet Tu's arm. Prophet, if you have anything to say, let's go back to grandmother's place later. Let's not cause a ruckus here for now. Madam is here, madam. Madam is here. Mother. Long Ji and Long Xiangyan turned their heads and saw a dignified and elegant lady in white walking over with a group of people. This Madame Long's hair was tied up and secured with a long jade hairpin. There was a happy smile on her face, and there seemed to be light flowing in her eyes. She was exceptionally beautiful. Since you're back, why aren't you going back to the mansion? What are you all standing here for? Han Suqiong smiled and held her daughter Long Shangyun's hand. She turned to look at Mu Xingqian and the others in Arbor. She carefully sized them up and was slightly startled. These people? He looks a little familiar. Mother, this is Aunt's son and daughter. Long Shangyun tugged at her mother's sleeve and said coquettishly. Han Suqiong was suddenly enlightened. She quickly stepped forward and looked at Mu Xingqian and Arbor. She excitedly said, Chu Yun's son and daughter have already grown up. I am your aunt, Han Suqiong. What's going on? What are you guys doing? Quarreling? Han Suqiong looked at Long Ji, whose face was bruised and swollen, and then turned to look at Mu Xingqian and his sister. Chapter 4357. Long Qian heaved a sigh of relief, as if he had seen his savior. He hurriedly walked forward and bowed to his mother. Mother, please help persuade cousin. Just now, cousin Long Ji suddenly barged out. Long Qian's ability to express himself was not bad. He quickly reported what had happened to his mother. Madame Long's face darkened as she turned to look at Long Ji. Long Ji, what are you saying? How much do you know about what happened back then? You're just a junior. How can you talk about your Aunt Chu Yun? How rude. I'll mention this to your mother and let her teach you a lesson about hierarchy. Long Ji had been beaten up by Lord Jojo and was now being reprimanded by Madame Long. He felt that he had lost all his face. His face, which could not be seen, was even more distorted and swollen. Han Sucheong ignored him and walked to Arbor and Mu Xingchen with a smile. She said softly, I received a letter from Long Qian a while ago saying that you guys are arriving soon. I've already prepared the bedding, furniture, and furnishings for you guys. I'm just waiting for you guys to come. I've been looking forward to you guys coming 3 days ago. I didn't expect you to be so late. Did something happen on the way? Or did that brat Long Qian cause an accident because he didn't lead the way properly? Madame Long's mouth was very sharp as she spoke rapidly. Even someone like Mu Xingchen, who was good at communicating, could not stand Madame Long's enthusiasm, let alone the usually cold Lord Jojo. Xiao Qiao didn't know how to react when she saw Madame Long's passionate and well-mannered demeanor. As the saying goes, one does not hit a smiling person. No matter how cold Lord Jojo's face was, he could not hold it in front of Madame Long. Mo Lian took a few steps forward and held his wife's hand. He nodded at Madame Long and said, There's no need to trouble yourself. We're leaving now.
Right.
Lord Jojo, who was stunned, regained his senses and nodded. Let's go. Madame Long hurriedly reached out to stop the two of them and comforted them with a smile. Don't be anxious. This is husband.
Oh.
Madame Long suddenly understood and looked at Mo Lian with admiration. My nephew's son-in-law is really talented. Her gaze shifted slightly as she turned to look at Long Huan. Long Huan nodded at Madame Long discreetly. Mrs. Long immediately smiled and said, It was all a misunderstanding. It's good that everyone has talked about it. How could the entire river of forgetfulness blame your mother, right? Your grandmother has been missing her for so many years. The younger generation is insensible and doesn't even know how to speak properly. Auntie will find someone to teach him a lesson later. Don't take it to heart. Mrs. Long smiled and stepped forward to hold Arbor's hand. Tu Xinji frowned slightly, but seeing Madame Long say so, he was too embarrassed to tear down Madame Long's stage. However, in his heart, he still had a lot of opinions about the little girl's ruthless way of doing things. She was so vicious at such a young age. Look at how she had tormented young Master Longji. Auntie is still at the city gate. I already know about this. Get someone to invite them in, Madame Long said with a smile. No matter what, they are people who were persecuted by the heavens. They are guests from afar. How can we not welcome them? If you have any plans in the future, you can discuss it with the clan leader. Xiao Mu creased her brows. Everything had been said by this Madame Long, so she had nothing to say. Chapter 43-58. Long Huan inwardly sighed in relief. Fortunately, Lin Mingya's mother, who was adept at dealing with money and power, was here. She finally managed to keep Lin Mingya's group of people, who were difficult to deal with. If he couldn't keep them after entering Wang Chuan House, then wouldn't all his hard work these days be a joke? Just thinking about it made him pity himself. Why was he so pitiful? Long Shongyun's expression also eased a bit, and she walked up to speak to the little stoic. She saw the stoic face shoot her an icy, chilly, and emotionless glance. She was so angry that she shut her mouth and didn't want to waste words with this person. Let's go to the residence first and meet your grandmother, okay? Madame Long said with a smile. Don't worry, I'll have someone bring Queen Qingcheng and the others over. Madame Long smiled with a warm expression. Let's go. Xingchen, this child, I remember seeing him once when he was young. He was just born then, but he's already grown so big now. Xingchen's younger sister is called Mu Qiao, right? How about Auntie call you Jojo? The friendly Madame Long chatted with them the entire way. Even a child like the little stoic, who caused an awkward silence as soon as she opened her mouth, couldn't really cool down the atmosphere. Madame Long's smile was like a spring breeze as she spoke with assurance and assurance. It truly made it hard for people to turn cold. Mu Xingqian cupped his hands at Madame Long and said indifferently, Madame Long doesn't need to be so courteous. Silly child, how is this courteous? We're all family, so why are you treating us as outsiders and speaking in a foreign language? Madame Long turned to smile at him and pointed at the residence's entrance directly in front of them. Here, we're here. This is our home. Wangchuan Dragon Clan's royal bloodline was built in the depths of the sea and surrounded by a water barrier within 5 kilometers in all directions. The mountain gate erected in front of them was the strongest barrier. Naturally, no one could pass through without an entry token. Arbor's group silently looked at each other. As Madame Long passed through the water barrier, the scenery in front of them abruptly changed. It was no longer misty and hazy. The scenery in front of them changed, and the corridors, courtyards, and pavilions were all in sight. The forest was deep, and a fragrant scent assailed their nostrils. When the servants saw Madame Long, they hurriedly bowed and greeted her. Madame Long smiled and nodded, indicating for them to do their own things. Jojo, are you going back to Yunyuan first, or, Madam? A middle-aged servant came forward with a smile and bowed to Madame Long. The patriarch has heard that young Master Mu and young Miss Mu have arrived. Please come with us. Madame Long couldn't help but smile. She turned around and looked at Arbor and the others apologetically. Jojo, Stardust, your grandmother already knows that you're here. Old people are impatient. I think you should go and pay your grandmother a visit first. What do you think? Mu Xingqian stretched out his hand and bowed. With an indifferent expression, he said, as it should be, Madame Long, please lead the way. Madame Long saw his solemn and indifferent expression and knew that the previous matter must have made this young master unhappy, and he would not be able to resolve the knot in his heart in a short time. Where is Cloud Court? Arbor suddenly asked. Long Huan sighed in relief and said with a smile, Younger cousin, you don't know, but Cloud Court is the court where Aunt used to live. He wasn't afraid that the little stoic would speak, but he was afraid that she would ignore him and not speak no matter what. When Mother found out that you were coming, she ordered people to tidy up inside and out a long time ago. Chapter 4359. Cloud Court is your mother's residence. Madame Long pulled on the young crown princess's hand and whispered softly, Do you want to go over and take a look now? Arbor glanced at her and shook his head apathetically. No need. So many years have passed. What's the rush? The little stoic turned around and walked away without looking back. Prince Emo knitted his brows, feeling faint regret in his heart. If he had known that Jojo would be so unhappy after coming to Forget River, he wouldn't have agreed to bring Jojo to such a sad place back then. This was only the first day they entered Forget River, but how many times had Jojo been sad already? Emo Lien was in a bad mood, so she naturally didn't find anyone pleasing to the eye. When she saw Madame Long and her family standing there in a daze, she couldn't help but ask coldly, Aren't we going to see Forget River Dragon Clan's clan leader? Madame Long snapped out of her trance and nodded with a smile. Everyone, please come this way. The group of people walked past a vibrant and colorful garden and walked along a small path to the pavilion in front of them. The pond pavilion was reflected in a circular lake, giving off a somewhat hazy and misty feeling. Mu Xingqian and the others were surprised. They didn't expect there to be such a bizarre scenery at the bottom of the deep sea. What was the difference between this and being on land? Qing Hongse couldn't resist touching the dewy grass. This is real. Of course it's real. A youth from the Phoenix tribe looked at her strangely. This is a spiritual realm that's a world of its own. It looks like it's merged with the sea outside, but it's actually not in the same world. Qing Shueshua nodded and said, The mist barrier we passed through earlier is probably a natural barrier that separates this place from the outside world. Arbor, Mu Xingqian, and the others stopped in front of the pavilion. They saw an elderly woman in embroidered robes with a dignified figure walking out of the pavilion. Although this old madam's hair was white and her face was wrinkled, her back was ramrod straight. In her hand was a scepter made of green wood. It was propped on the ground with a fist-sized black pearl embedded at the top. Behind the old madam was a scholarly man in a green robe. He was around the middle of his life and had a sickly look on his face. At first glance, one could tell that his body was weak and that he needed to be bedridden all year round. The two of them met Arbor's group, and the old woman's gaze instantly stopped on Arbor's face. It was as if she was looking at something far away through that frosty little face of hers. The old madam didn't say anything. Instead, it was the sickly green-robed man behind her who took a few steps forward with an excited expression. He looked at Mu Xingqian and Arbor standing at the front and asked in a trembling voice, "Is it Xingqian and Jojo?" I am your uncle, Long Chiyu." Arbor was not as excited as Long Chiyu, and neither was Mu Xingqian. The two siblings only quietly watched this cheap uncle who had suddenly appeared in front of them, their expressions extremely indifferent. When the old madam heard Long Chiyu's voice, she recovered her senses. Only then did she withdraw her distant gaze from Arbor and say indifferently, "Come in with me. Let's sit down and talk." Arbor looked coldly at the old madam. "You looked at me just now. Did you see something? Did you see your pitiful daughter? Your lowly daughter? Do you know how and where she died?" Long Chiyu's face paled slightly. Chapter 40, 360. What identity are you using to speak to us? Maternal grandmother? Dragon Clan's clan head? Or your daughter, who died outside? Long Qian's mother? Impudent! A beautiful middle-aged woman beside the old madam couldn't help but shout angrily. Long Qian raised her hand and stopped that beautiful woman from continuing to hoot. She took a deep breath and looked at Arbor. "I know you siblings have a grudge against me." Grudge? Arbor couldn't help but snicker. He tilted his head and looked at everyone in disdain. How can someone without feelings have a grudge? Everyone looked over in a daze. They saw the little stoic, whose white robes were not tainted by a speck of dust. Her expression was indifferent as she stood there with her hands behind her back. She was like the vast sky, aloof and lonely. "Us siblings didn't come here to acknowledge you as our family, nor do we have any intention of seeking connections. We just want you to hand over all of Mother's belongings. Also, please hand over her remaining life lantern's broken shadow. Because you don't deserve it." "You." The beautiful middle-aged woman glared and couldn't help but turn to look at the Dragon Clan's clan head, Long Qian. "Aunt, are you going to allow her to be so impudent? Are you going to allow her to trample on our Dragon Clan's face?"
"Aunt."
"You heard about what happened just now as well. This woman who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth dared to severely injure my son. Aunt, he's your grandson too. Are you going to allow her to shut up?" Long Qian looked sternly at that beautiful woman.
"Aunt."
Bai Ning Shuang stomped her feet in anger. She had already heard about her son Long Ji's incident, but she hadn't rushed over to see how badly he was injured. However, she felt like her heart was about to shatter when she heard the vivid description of the incident from the messenger. "Must you speak like this?" Old Madame Long Qian took a deep breath and leaned on the cane in her hand. "Just now, how can you not know what I did just now? That bastard called Long Ji insulted my mother at the city gates. This isn't something that happened overnight, right? Traitor? Is this the crime that you Dragon Clan scum are trying to frame her with? She is such a proud and aloof person. Why should she accept your accusations? When she single-handedly fought with the Shuntian manor, what were you cowardly clansmen who only knew how to hide at the bottom of the sea doing? Moaning about nothing, living like a drunken stupor? I only ask today, how much is Xiao Xiao Feng you? Look at her with a smile. She's such a foolish woman. She sacrificed her entire life for your despicable race. In the end, she even lost her life. It's funny, isn't it? I think it's funny too. Ha! What a sad life. Stop talking. Long Qian shouted angrily. She is destined to be alone for the rest of her life. Arbor suddenly raised his voice, and his cold voice covered Long Qian's shout. Do you know what it means to be alone? Family, parents, brother, husband, son, daughter. Everything is gone. In the end, he died miserably in that secret realm. Don't you have a heart? Don't you feel pain? She didn't know why her eyes were brimming with tears at the end. Long Qian gripped the cane and stood there with a stern expression. Yet Long Qiyu wailed bitterly and dashed forward to hug the little stoic. Suddenly, he was pushed away forcefully and met with a pair of bone-chilling phoenix eyes. Mo Lian reached out to pull the little girl into his arms. He suppressed his emotions, and his voice was low and trembling. Let's go back. Chapter 4361. It had only been a short while, but she had angered Jojo to this extent multiple times in a row. Go away. You don't have the right to touch her. Mo Lian looked disgusted and pushed Long Qiyu to the ground. He grabbed her waist and looked down at her with wavering eyes. I'll take you back. We won't care about what happens here anymore. I only want you to be happy. What merfolk tribe? What killing Tianyun? These people and matters had nothing to do with his Jojo. Mo Lian caressed her head and looked down at her reddened eyes, unable to hide the heartache in his eyes. Jojo, don't cry. My heart is in unbearable pain when you cry. I don't know where to go, although he didn't say anything. The warmth from his palms calmed Arbor down a little. Long Qiyu collapsed on the ground and started bawling. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's Uncle's fault. It's me. I've let your mother down. It's all because I'm useless. Madame Long rushed forward to support Long Qiyu, who was on the verge of a breakdown. She turned around and looked at Arbor with a complicated expression. Long Qian gripped the staff in his hand tightly and said indifferently, Don't cry. I've taught you for so many years. Why do you still only know how to cry when something happens? Long Qiyu felt terrible. He supported his wife's hand and staggered to steady himself. Mother, what happened back then? You can't blame anyone for what happened back then. Long Qian turned to look at Arbor, a cold glint shooting out of his eyes. You're young and don't know the whole story. It's pardonable. But things aren't what you think. Send Mother's life lantern's broken shadow and all of her belongings to Cloud Court within 2 hours. Mo Lian coldly interrupted Long Qian's words and directly picked up the little stoic before turning to leave. Clan Headlong, you can try the consequences of disobeying this monarch. I'm afraid you can't afford to gamble. After throwing down these icy words, Mo Lian was disinclined to continue conversing with other people, so he left with Qiao Mu in his arms without looking back. Mu Xingqian only felt his heart clench uncomfortably. He glanced at his indifferent grandmother, then mechanically turned his head and strode after her. Although the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal was smiling, his eyes were cold. Leisurely putting down his arms, he glanced at the Silent Dragon clan leader and chuckled. Hurry up, our patience is very limited. When the rest of the people saw this, they hurriedly followed and left in a group. Shue shue, look. Is that Mother? Qing Hongsa suddenly cried out in surprise. She raised her hand and tugged at Qing Shueshue's sleeve. Qing Shueshue naturally saw the queen and her entourage. She hurriedly went up to greet them, unable to hide her excitement. Mother. Qing Hongsa stood behind Qing Shueshue and did not step forward. She only looked at the queen with a complicated expression. Heilwan stepped forward and bowed in greeting. Greetings to Her Majesty. This subject is very happy that Her Majesty is safe and sound. Beautiful queen looked travel-worn, but her eyes were exceptionally black and bright. Qing Shueshue looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. She curled her fingers and restrained herself. Only then did she not impulsively jump into her mother's arms. Qing Yi also looked at Qing Shueshue with a gratified expression. Shue shue, Mother is proud of you. Qing Yi reached out with a smile and hugged her daughter, who flew into her arms. She stroked her hair with a gentle gaze. Chapter 4362. When I came in just now, I heard that Jojo had some conflict with the mermen. Where are they now? Mother, it's a long story. Let's talk as we walk. Qing Hongsa stood outside the crowd. She opened her mouth slightly and watched Qing Shueshue and her mother leave together. She froze on the spot. Heilwan and the others followed the queen, leaving her standing there in a daze for a long time. Then she slowly followed them, dejected. So her mother really didn't like her. Didn't she already know this? Why did she still feel sad? Mother, are we really going to stay in Wangchuan? Qing Shueshua held the queen's left hand and tilted her head to look at her. If she lived under someone else's roof for a long time, it wouldn't feel good. Qingyi looked at her with a smile. Are we going to set up the Tianyan battle group? Mother, you want to join? Li Sha Island should be a good choice. Qingyi patted the back of her daughter's hand. We'll take it one step at a time. Let's see first. Arbor pushed open a long window and looked up at the silver moonlight pouring down from the sky. Faint silver frost covered the window. The faint moonlight illuminated the courtyard. A gust of hot wind blew over, ruffling a strand of hair by her temples. Mo Lian walked slowly to her side and looked down at a small mahogany box on the table. Not long ago, the merman had sent her mother's belongings. There weren't many of them. After all these years, her mother only had this small box with her. A few pieces of jewelry and a few personal items. There was also a short knife inlaid with a row of blue gems. It looked very earthy. It was very ugly and the handle of the scabbard had been worn out. It was clear that the owner liked this knife very much. Arbor took it out. The blade hadn't been used for so many years and was no longer shiny. There was even a small cut on the blunt edge of the knife. So ugly, Arbor muttered to herself. Her small hand touched the blade inch by inch and stopped for a moment. Fu Sheng. What? Emolian paused and looked down at his wife's hand. Fu Sheng. Arbor touched the blurry handwriting on the blade. Fu Sheng. Fu Sheng. Mo Lian murmured. Life is like a dream, but when you wake up from the dream, it's all in vain. Arbor put the blunt knife back into its sheath and held it tightly in his hand. My Jojo. Mo Lian reached out and hugged her slender waist. She sighed softly and said, Tomorrow, we will go back. Don't meddle in these matters anymore. Arbor lifted his head and looked at him seriously. After a long time, he shook his head. Mo Lian raised his eyebrows slightly. Not for anything else. Arbor put his hand over his heart and murmured softly, For you, for our parents and siblings, for our friends. I hope that the 3 prefectures will be stable, that the country will continue to exist, and that the world will be peaceful and prosperous. I don't want to see this world become hell on earth, just like the previous world. Who would be willing to experience the world of desolation and ruins after having seen the beautiful flowers in full bloom? We don't fight for others. We only fight for the well-being of our future generations. Mo Lian's eyes flickered. He reached out and cupped her small face. He nodded with a smile. Good, my Jojo is so good. Everything will be as you wish. What do you think Fu Xing means? Arbor leaned against his chest and asked softly. How could the broken knife that her mother treasured so much be meaningless? Fu Sheng. Fu Sheng, what was Fu Sheng? Chapter 43-63. The next day the main hall of the Dragon Clan was filled with many people. Queen Qingcheng sat on the left side and chatted with the clan leader, Long Qian, for less than 3 sentences when a servant announced their arrival. Long Qian looked up and saw the cold-faced little stoic entering hand in hand with a tall and slender black-clothed youth. They stood in the center of the hall. Jojo. Queen Qingcheng stood up happily and hurried over to greet him. Xiaomu looked over. When she met her smiling gaze, her expression relaxed, and her lips involuntarily curled into a faint smile. Long Xiongyan saw this and hastily tugged on her brother's sleeve. Long Xiong felt a bit bitter inside. This little stoic was too hard to get along with. The siblings had interacted with this stoic face for so many days, but they had never seen her show such a sincere smile to them. Aunt Yi. Queen Qingyi walked over and hugged her. She patted her shoulder. It's great that you're all okay. Aunt Yi, is there a transportation formation at the bottom of the sea that will send you away? Mu Xingchen couldn't help but ask. Qingyi didn't hide it and nodded. This transportation formation was set up by your mother. It's been so many years. I didn't expect that it would come in handy one day. The time we were still young, we often met up and went to the Sea Valley to train together. Your mother found it troublesome, so she asked someone to set up a transportation formation so she could find me anytime. Qingyi couldn't help but yearn for it when she talked about her childhood. In the blink of an eye, you're all grown up. That's all in the past. Jojo, Xing Chen. Yesterday? Yesterday was just a misunderstanding. Long Qian interrupted Queen Qingye's words. Arbor glanced at her coldly. Our mission this time is to set up and kill the Heavenly Fate battle group. Let's cut the crap. Previously, when Long Xiang discussed with us, what island did he say we would do it on? When Long Xiang heard the little crown princess calling his name, he hastily came out from the Long clan and nodded. Yes, yes. The Dragon clan is going to set up the base of the Celestial Fate Legion on Lisha Island. When everyone is gathered, we will begin the secret training. With half a year as the deadline, we, the Forgotten River Dragon clan, will cooperate with the training of the 3 continents. Since that's the case, let's go together. Arbor turned to the queen and nodded.
All right.
Long Qian's face was cold the entire time. When she heard this, she couldn't help but say, "Is this the only thing we can talk about? What else do you want to talk about?" Arbor looked coldly at the dignified old lady. "I want to talk to you in private," Long Qian said. "That won't be necessary." Mo Lian directly refused and said with a cold expression, "You just need to do as you said and provide that island. 10,000 elites from the Divine Prefecture should be able to reach the River of Forgetfulness in the next 2 days. There are 10,000 elites from the Tsang and Ming continent. They will probably arrive in 2 days." Mo Lian looked up at Long Qian and said, "So, you just have to prepare yourself." After Long Qian was reprimanded by Prince Mo, she didn't get angry. Of course, she knew who these 2 people were. However, she had to talk to the little stoic face to face. No one could stop her. "I know that you have opinions about me and the entire Long clan," Long Qian said coldly. Chapter 43-64. But there are many things that are not as simple as you children think. Back then, the Wangchuan region was attacked by you humans. How many people died, and how many resources were lost? Don't you know? Tu Xianzi walked out of the crowd with his cane and snorted. That's all in the past. We won't pursue the matter, and we won't seek any justice. Instead, we want to form an alliance with you. Shouldn't you show some sincerity? Dear Tu Xianzi, is our sincerity not enough? The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal waved the fan in his hand and looked at Tu Xianzi with a smile. We came all the way here from the land of the gods and accepted the alliance. What else do you want? Long Qian looked at Arbor seriously and said, "I want to talk to you face to face." "We have nothing to talk about." Arbor turned around and pulled Mo Lian out. Long Qian ordered coldly, "Stop them." Immediately, countless merman guards swarmed in from outside and surrounded the 2 of them. Mo Lian turned around with a spurious smile to look at the frosty Long Qian. "Clan Head Long, we advise you to be prudent and think thrice." Long Qian looked at Mo Lian coldly and turned to look at Arbor. However, he saw that the little girl's naturally cold face did not show any emotion. Only her dark eyes were staring at him coldly and silently. He felt a little scared. Long Qian took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He raised his hand slightly and said, "I only need 15 minutes. You can leave once you're done." "There's nothing that can't be said." Arbor's eyes were cold. "If you have something to say, you can say it here." "Are you sure?" Long Qian couldn't help but be angry at the little girl's stubborn attitude. He raised his voice and shouted. Arbor nodded.
"Speak."
"If that's the case, then please, and bye." "And bye." Long Qian and Long Shangyun couldn't help but interrupt by Ning Shuang. They looked at Long Qian anxiously with a serious expression. "Grandmother, please calm down." "Grandmother, why are you getting angry at the stoic face? She was born like that, expressionless to everyone. Didn't you see that she was also expressionless when facing her husband?" "It's not targeted at you," Long Shangyun said anxiously. Long Qian's furious gaze slowly calmed down. She stared at Arbor and said, "This is a serious matter. I can only talk to you in private. A quarter of an hour should be enough." Arbor stared at her coldly for a moment, then took her husband's hand and walked out. Long Huan, how do I get to Lisho Island? Long Huan could not help but smile bitterly. At this time, she really did not want to be called by the little crown princess. Refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. Bai Ning Shuang's face was filled with anger, but she had nowhere to vent it. Thinking of her poor son Long Ji's miserable state, she wished she could cut the woman in front of her into 1,000 pieces and pull out her tendons and bones. Her precious son was actually beaten up by a little bastard to the point that half of his body was paralyzed. How could she let such a vicious woman go today? Oh, it's so lively here. A light chuckle came from the door. The person was dressed in white. He was tall and slender, and his long hair hung loosely by his waist. As he walked over with a smile, it was as if there was a faint layer of light surrounding him. State Preceptor? Mo Lien and Arbor both murmured. Chapter 4365. Didn't the State Preceptor say he was imprisoned? Wasn't the State Preceptor forcefully detained by the mere people? Looking at this guy's unscathed appearance, could it be in order to survive? The State Preceptor shamelessly sought refuge with the Wang Chuan Dragon Clan? Your Highness, Crown Princess, why are you two looking at me like that? The State Preceptor pretended his heart was thumping rapidly and raised his hand to calm his heart. Arbor's eyes were cold, like knives stabbing at the person in front of him, sizing him up. From the first time she met the State Preceptor, she felt that he was very strange, but there was also a sense of familiarity amidst the strangeness. They met several times at the palace banquets. He seemed to speak on her and the Crown Prince's behalf, but in fact, he was dragging them down time and time again. For example, at the beginning, when the elders of the Divine Continent rejected her marriage with Mo Lien, the State Preceptor suggested that the wandering Great Elder make this decision. However, at that time, everyone thought that the unreliable Great Elder Kong Yin would not return so quickly. In the end, the old monk returned and gave everyone a huge surprise. Another example was suggesting to postpone the wedding date. Another example was requesting to see the Crown Prince and suggesting to bring the little Crown Princess along to the Wangchuan for a discussion. Each of these things were strange, seemingly unrelated, but in fact, they were all directed at her. You are not the State Preceptor. You are the Snake Beauty. You are Ding Ting Ding Ding Yun. Sir Jojo suddenly realized. Once he said this, Mo Lien jumped in fright and subconsciously pulled his wife into his arms. The Black Moon sword suddenly flew out of his conscious and cautiously blocked in front of the two. Tisk, the State Preceptor on the opposite side lightly sked and shook his head, saying, Xiao Qiao, why do you look like you have seen a ghost? Aren't you a ghost? A ghost haunting you. All right, everyone, harmony breeds wealth. Don't draw your swords. The State Preceptor walked over with a smile. He used two slender fingers to press down the sword of the Mere-People guard beside him and walked to Arbor, staring deeply at the Black Moon in front of him. I miss you, Xiao Qiao. Arbor looked at him expressionlessly. Why are you pretending to be the State Preceptor? Because I want to see you. What else can it be for? Can I see you whenever I want by pretending to be the State Preceptor? The State Preceptor blinked. Under everyone's gaze, that face's had a series of bone and muscle transformations. Soon, a face that was as beautiful as a flower appeared. She blinked her charming eyes and smiled at the two of them. Where's the State Preceptor? State Preceptor? What State Preceptor? The original State Preceptor. Xiaomu practically didn't want to talk to him. Young Master Ding glanced at her with a smile and casually fiddled with his slender fingers. What an annoying person. He's not even willing to cooperate with me. I have no other choice but to let him die. You even searched his soul? His T-Tess, Master, T's, S. How did you do it? Mo Lien's eyes were filled with shock. The State Preceptor Ding Yin killed was a true expert, and he was about 200 years old. His cultivation was naturally deep. Ding Yun, this person usually acted too well. Even his father did not discover the slightest clue. If Ding Yun conspired against the great emperor, Mo Lien was terrified as she thought about it, and felt a chill in her heart. Why are you wasting words with them? Bai Ning Shuang said angrily. Take him down. I've been very busy these few days. I'll probably be back to normal by Saturday. Chapter 4366. Ding Yan glanced at Bai Ning Shuang indifferently. Oh, who are you to yell at me? Bai Ning Shuang choked at his words. Indeed, this punk had yet to be acknowledged by the Long clan. She was in no position to yell at him for help. But Bai Ning Shuang felt extremely indignant at being choked right in front of her face. A cold glint flashed in her eyes. What an audacious brat. Recently, anyone in this family could really insult her to her face. She let this punk do it, but he was still spouting nonsense. He really didn't know what he was doing. Long Shengyun frowned. Why did you come out? Ding Yun ignored her. His beautiful eyes were smiling as he looked at Arbor. Little Xiao, why don't we find a place to talk? Sir Jojo glared at him coldly, then turned to look at Long Huan. His gaze was sharp and merciless. You've been hooking up with him for a long time? What did he mean by hooking up? Long Huan and young Master Ding wanted to roll their eyes at the same time. Why did these words sound so awkward? Cousin, you're thinking too much. Ding Yin took a step forward and said with a smile, Of course not. I'm not with them. We're the ones who are together. Arbor looked at him coldly. I met Sikong Fuling.
Oh.
I promised her to meet you. Cult Master Ding immediately beamed and nodded. That's great. Long Huan couldn't help but roll his eyes at young Master Ding. He dared to bet with his 20 years of intelligence that Sir Jojo's next words would definitely not satisfy young Master Ding. As expected, Arbor said coldly, Now that we've met, I've fulfilled my promise. Stay away from me in the future. Cult Master Ding was instantly flabbergasted. He stared at her for a long time. That means we've met? Are you blind? If this was a meeting, then what was? Xiao Mu grumpily rebuked him before turning to look at her husband. Mo Lian nodded knowingly, took her hand and walked out. Young Master Ding was not angry. He waved his hand with a smile and ran out. Jojo, wait. I have something to tell you. Long Qian's face darkened as she watched them leave without looking back. Her face was extremely ugly. Bai Ning Shuang was flustered and exasperated. And are you going to let them leave just like that? Shut up. Long Qian had lived for so long, so she was naturally knowledgeable. With Bai Ning Shuang's current state, how could she not know? Wasn't it because of Longji's incident that he harbored a grudge against Xiao Mu and her husband? But with just her, Bai Ning Shuang, he really wasn't a match for that ferocious couple. You don't have to meddle in the affairs of the clan. Long Qian coldly looked up and glanced at Bai Ning Shuang. It's time for your son, Long Ji, to be educated. He's always talking about Chu Yun's past. Who gave him the guts to do that? Long Qian sneered. He doesn't act like one at all. As his mother, you don't even know how to correct his nonsense. Now that he's being beaten up, he deserves it. You don't have to blame others. Bai Ning Shuang couldn't help but feel resentful. Who in the entire Forget Creek doesn't know about Sister Chu Yun? Aunt, why are you saying this now? This was too unkind. This wasn't the first time she had said this. For so many years, the entire Forget Creek had been filled with stories about Long Chu Yun betraying the clan. Chapter 4367. They said that she watched helplessly as the Long family's cadet branch brought a large group of people to attack Wang Chuan. They said that she stood by and did not care about the lives of her family members at all. In the end, didn't they say that she was cold, selfish, and had no concept of bloodline?
Why?
Now that her daughter had returned, the old lady wanted to push all the blame onto her son. Her son, Longji, was not the only one spreading this rumor. If the old lady really cared, why didn't she stop others from spreading it before? Why did she have to say this when her daughter returned? Bai Ning Shuang's lungs were about to explode from anger. Although she was full of complaints and wanted to explode, she had no choice but to swallow all her words when she saw Long Qian's solemn and cold face. Bai Ning Shuang bowed. And Longji may be reckless, But your granddaughter didn't go easy either. Longji is still lying on the bed and can't get up. Long Qian was already vexed about how to communicate with the little stoic face-to-face. Now that Bai Ning Shuang reprimanded her, she became even more indignant. It's not like you don't know what's the most important thing right now. Of course I know. Shui Yuan is so seriously ill. As her aunt, how can I not feel heartache? Bai Ning Shuang pretended to use a handkerchief to wipe the non-existent tears from the corners of her eyes. She sighed and said, "However, Aunt, as you can see, your granddaughter isn't an easy person to get along with. Will she listen to us if we talk to her softly like this? Then what do you have in mind?" Bai Ning Shuang's expression darkened as a hint of viciousness flashed across her eyes. "Of course, we have to control them first. Once we have enough bargaining chips, we can discuss that matter with her. Isn't that right, huh?" Long Qian sneered. "You're so naive." Bai Ning Shuang's face flushed red, and her lips quivered. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond to Long Qian. The Dragon Clan leader glared at Bai Ning Shuang coldly. "Go back and watch over your son. Don't cause trouble for me." Bai Ning Shuang was intimidated by the Dragon Clan leader's stern tone. Although she was indignant, she could only return. When she returned to her own courtyard, she was even more displeased by the Dragon Clan leader's words. Seeing her son whining nonstop on the bed, Bai Ning Shuang's heart ached, and she gritted her teeth. "Ah Chun." A nimble figure appeared in front of Bai Ning Shuang. The Kongkong's line. Ever since Benefactress came to this river of forgetfulness, she seems to be even busier. We can only see each other a few times in a day. The little monk was wearing a small white monk robe. He was holding a lollipop in his mouth as he squatted under a peach tree, mumbling softly. Another moon-white figure squatted beside the little monk Kong Kong with a lollipop in her mouth. She couldn't help but shake her head and say, "Kong Kong, do you miss my sisters?" The small monk pursed his small diamond-shaped lips and remained silent. Kong Kong's. To her, Kong Kong. Jolin sucked on a lollipop and said with a grin, "Actually, I've always been curious about something. Mrs. Sister,
Please tell me."
Chapter 4368. The Peony Fairy and the Ginkgo Fairy, who were sitting not far behind this pair of adult and child, were leisurely snacking on melon seeds and drinking tea. When they heard their bizarre conversation, the corners of their mouths twitched uncontrollably. "You're so talkative, and my sister doesn't like to talk normally. How exactly do you two communicate?" The little monk, Kong Kong, lifted his large, watery eyes and brushed Xiao Lin an irritated glance. "What do you know?" Every time Kong Kong speaks, Benefactress listens attentively.
Sigh.
The little monk sighed in melancholy. He raised his small, shiny, bald head and gazed at the peach tree at a 45-degree angle. A large, bright red peach leaped into the little fellow's eyes, causing him to involuntarily click his tongue. This peach is so eye-catching on top of this little monk's head. Is it because this little monk wants to eat it? The little monk extended two chubby fingers and gestured at the starting distance. Unfortunately, Benefactress doesn't like to talk too much. She only opens her mouth when she's insulting someone. The little monk shook his head, and a fire spirit abruptly sprayed out from his chubby little hands. The large peach on top of his head was struck by the fire spirit and fell down. The little monk hugged his peach fully and contentedly, turning a deaf ear to the Benefactress's sister's guffaws. "Sister." Xiao Lin jumped up. The little monk hastily looked up and saw the little stoic girl patter over from afar. Kong Kong's large eyes instantly turned round, and he subconsciously put the peach back into his inner world. Then, he broke into a run and ran toward the little stoic. "Benefactress." The little fellow pounced and latched onto her body. "Benefactress, Benefactress, you're finally back." The stoic expressionlessly pulled him off her body and lifted him up, exchanging glances with him. "You got fat again," the little stoic pointed out mercilessly. The little monk blinked. The lollipop in his mouth was still there, but his pair of large, adorable eyes were tinged with astonishment. "Benefactress, You're insulting me as soon as you open your mouth? Are you still my gentle and amiable benefactress? You're not. Go. Ha 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 ha. Shaolin are squatted on the ground and couldn't help but slap her thigh as she guffawed. Looking at this little fat monk who was constantly thinking about his benefactress, in the end, when they met, he could only be mercilessly scolded. The small monk turned his head and glared at Jolin with an accusing gaze. Jolin hurriedly held back her laughter and waved her small hands. Ha, sorry, I couldn't help it. Arbor looked at his sister, his gaze softening. How is it? Shaolin jumped up and spun a few rounds in front of her sister. Sister, look. Arbor looked at her for a while and nodded. Very good. Dealing had broken through to the spirit realm and was now a second-rank spirit master. Our dear Shaolin, who controlled the 9th layer spiritual water and innate water, summoned a ball of water mist with a wave of her small hand. She stood there charmingly and smiled at Xiao Mu the entire way. Arbor looked at her for a while, then took out a few bottles of pills from his inner world and handed them to his sister. You don't have to be in a hurry to advance. Just stabilize your cultivation. These pills can help you stabilize your current realm, so don't be too anxious to advance. Jolin nodded repeatedly and took the pill bottles, storing them in her inner world. Sister, I'll listen to you. Arbor was very satisfied and patted his sister's small head. Chapter 4369. Elder Sister. Why did you come in at this time? Jolin asked with a smile. Arbor nodded. Just now, I sensed a very strong fluctuation of divine power. Duanmu should be coming out of seclusion. As he spoke, everyone heard a long howl from afar. Arbor's eyes narrowed, and he ordered Qiuqiu, let him out quickly. Once Duanmu Qing left the outside world, he would have to undergo the 5 spirits' reincarnation tribulation. Facts had proven that the heavenly Tao, this old thing, was indeed a judge of character. When Duanmu Qing was in the 5-spirit reincarnation cycle, there weren't so many problems. It was unlike the time when the heavenly Tao restricted how phase advancement and forcefully created the great tribulation of lightning and fire. This time, Duanmu Qing had successfully completed the 5 spirits reincarnation tribulation in less than an hour. After going through the 5 levels of wood, lightning, water, fire, and earth, Duanmu Qing successfully completed his advancement and became a grade 2 god tier master. Arbor, Mo Lian, Hu Shichen, and the rest of the onlookers watched Duanmu Qing from the front of the court until he completed his advancement. With such a big commotion, Long Ji and Long Xiangyun were urgently called over. When they saw Duanmu Qing's current state, the two of them couldn't help but curse in their hearts what was going on. He was simply sick in the head. No wonder the seawater was churning, and the entire underwater city was shaking. It turned out that someone was undergoing the 5 spirits' reincarnation tribulation in their underwater spiritual realm. Arbor turned and saw the siblings' ugly expressions. He shook his head and said in a low voice, I'm sorry, but Duanmu Qing can't do anything about it. After all, as soon as he came out of the star domain, he was immediately targeted by the heavenly Tao's lightning tribulation. The heavenly Tao unleashed its might. The power of the 5 spirits passed through the seawater and rushed towards Duanmu Qing. They could not stop it, could they? I thought something had happened. Long Huan looked at her speechlessly and said, Our dwelling place can't withstand the power of the 5 spirits of the heavenly Tao. At this time, Duanmu Qing had already completed his advancement. He slowly walked in front of Arbor with a faint smile in his eyes. He was already completely fine. The corpse poison that had previously been flowing through his body had now been completely removed. He had actually profited from the disaster and successfully advanced to the deity realm. In terms of cultivation, he had advanced by leaps and bounds. Arbor glanced at him. Thinking of how this guy had cut off his own wrist, he felt a little angry for no reason. They all lowered their heads to look at her. The little stoic's face was cold and expressionless as she turned around to leave. Duanmu Qing could not help but smile bitterly. Jojo is still angry. It's obvious. Mo Lian glanced at him and was about to say something when a muffled dong sound came from afar. Then a howl was heard. Everyone was shocked, and they hastily chased after Qiao Mu. From afar, he saw the little girl expressionlessly holding a vine whip and fighting with a person in front of her. Her silhouette was extremely fast, and the speed of her attacks was so fast that it made people feel a little dazzled. 1 second, she was still in front of that person. The next second, she had already teleported behind that person. The moment she appeared, she slashed towards that person's neck. Long Ji and Long Xiangyan's hearts jumped violently. The little girl's savagery was probably one of a kind. She simply could not be bothered to waste words with whoever attacked her. She also did not ask for the reason and directly counterattacked. Fuck. Quickly stop. Long Xiangyan couldn't help but exclaim when she saw this person's face clearly. Chapter 40, 370. Eldest brother, it's Ah-chun. He's Madame Bai's. Long Xiangyun hastily tugged at Long Qian's sleeve. Long Qian's face alternated between green and white. He laughed bitterly in his heart, wishing for nothing more than to flick his sleeves and leave immediately. What the heck was going on? This second aunt, could it be that she couldn't use her brain before doing something? He didn't believe that grandmother ordered this. It must be Bai Ningxuang herself, who came to stir up trouble for the sake of avenging her son, Long Ji. In this way, his little stoic cousin would definitely loathe their Long family even more. This was simply adding fuel to the fire. Ah-chun's movements were very nimble. He roared and retreated a step, barely avoiding the little stoic's startling swan blade. You're courting death. An apathetic expression hung on the stoic face. With a slight flick of her wrist, several cold glints flew toward Ah-chun's face. Hurry and dodge. Long Xiangyun shouted angrily. The Long family disciples who were originally going to help hastily retreated. In the blink of an eye, a series of explosions came from the unlucky Ah-chun's body. Bang bang. Bang 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 bang. Bang 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 bang. His entire body was immediately covered in blood, and his body was blasted to pieces. Long Qian's heart chilled. He inwardly thought that these concealed weapons were very powerful. Even Ah-chun, a level 10 spirit realm cultivator, didn't have the slightest ability to ward them off. It could be imagined how terrifying these things were. Cousin, please. Before Long Qian could finish speaking, he saw the little stoic fly up and use startling swan blade. A cold glint sharply slid past Ah-chun's neck. A faint line of blood drew open on that person's neck, and in a flash, a whole head fell to the ground. This back and forth was merely a matter of minutes. Long Xiangyun shuddered all over and looked up at the little stoic. She was untainted by a speck of dust. Her plain clothes were as white as snow, and her bright eyes shone brightly. Her pitch-black pupils seemed to be leaping with sparks, so scorching that it was almost impossible to look straight at them. The Long family is very good. Arbor threw down this sentence coldly and walked toward the entrance. Since you want to start a war, then let's fight. No, 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 no. That's not it. Long Xiangyun muttered to herself. Long Shi hurriedly chased after her and cried out, Cousin, it's a misunderstanding. It's really a misunderstanding. Madame Bai acted on her own accord. It was not my grandmother's idea. Is there a difference? Arbor suddenly turned his head and looked at him coldly. Long Huan choked for a moment. He suddenly felt that there was no difference whether it was Madame Bai's men or his grandmother's orders. After all, his aunt was a member of the Dragon Clan. Everything she did represented the Dragon Clan. Long Yin took a deep breath. I'm sorry, cousin. Don't get angry first. I will immediately report this matter to the Patriarch and let her deal with it, okay? Cripple her, Arbor said coldly. Just now, that servant called Ah-chun snatched her eyes without a second word. If it weren't for that, how could she have retaliated so ruthlessly? Mo Lian quickly walked up and pulled Arbor to examine her from head to toe with a frown. She turned to look at Long Qian and said coldly, Bai Ningxuang must die. If she doesn't die, then all of you can die. The man's voice was as cold as ice without any room for negotiation. He raised his hand, and countless black figures appeared from all directions. They raised their arms and shouted, Die, die, die. Chapter 4371. Long Huan's expression naturally appeared extremely unsightly. Normally, they didn't see many people appear beside the Crown Prince. Most of the Dragon Clan's attention was placed on those 100 Phoenix clansmen with high cultivation, who knew that no less than 1,000 people would pounce out when the Crown Prince casually waved his hand. Looking closely at his finger, these black-clothed attendants were released from a space ring. They heard that His Highness the Crown Prince was a rare divine artifact master, and that ring should be a space artifact that could store life. Long Xiangyun wanted to go up and say something, but her elder brother pulled her back and stopped her steps. Long Huan's complicated gaze landed on Arbor, and he sighed deeply. Madam Bai, Long Huan, Mo Lian coldly interrupted him. Ever since you stepped into the river of forgetfulness, think carefully. How many people have tried to cause trouble for Jojo, and how many people have ulterior motives? Even if you want to be a peacemaker, you have to see if the conditions allow it. Long Huan felt a chill run down his spine when he was stared at by the Crown Prince's bone-chilling phoenix eyes. Who is Bai Ning Shuang to dare come here and stir up trouble? Mo Lian coldly said, Go. Since the Dragon Clan of Forgetfulness can't bear to lay a hand on this woman, go and bring her here. Yes. The Purple Forest Guard leader cupped his fists after receiving the order and immediately left with a group of black-clothed youths. You. Long Xiangyun's expression shifted, and she hastily went up to stop them. Crown Prince, this is the river of forgetfulness. Don't, long-winded. Prince Mo interrupted Long Xiangyun's incessant chatter. His phoenix eyes were abnormally chilly, like the clear splendor of a cold moon. What's going on? I just went over to take care of some trivial matters. Long Huan, why are you arguing with Jojo again? A giggling voice came from afar. Everyone turned to look and saw young Master Ding, who was dressed in a purple robe, walking along the flowery path. With a gentle breeze, fragmented osmanthus flowers fell one after another, sprinkling on his hair, body, and feet, covering the ground in a faint golden hue. So ugly, the little stoic expressionlessly said, Everyone, can you be any more dishonest than you already are? Regardless of whether this young man in purple is standing in the crowd or in the bustling world, he is not inferior to your husband and the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal, right? Flirting. Don't know what you're talking about, Arbor said coldly. Hu Shichin was speechless. Coquettish and pretentious. Mo Lian, naturally seductive and pretentious. Cough, cough, cough. Mu Xingchen and Holy Sun Mi Yan couldn't help but cough. Long Xiangyun speechlessly turned to a certain facial paralysis whose words kept popping out. Truthfully speaking, she couldn't bear the sight of Ding Yun's actions as well. But at the very least, she wasn't blind, so it was naturally impossible for her to connect Ding Yun with the words ugly as hell and the pile of criticism that followed. Just how much did Sir Jojo dislike the person in front of him? Long Huan silently glanced at the little girl and then looked at Ding Yun with sympathy. He suddenly felt that compared to this young and handsome young master that Sir Jojo disliked so much, at least he wasn't as loathsome. Ding Yun walked over and stopped in front of Arbor and the others. He asked with a smile, Jojo, is Long Huan looking for trouble with you? Long Huan couldn't help but roll his eyes. Didn't he receive enough lessons on this journey? Did he have nothing better to do than to find trouble with the little stoic? Chapter 4372. Xiao Mu's small face was stoic as she coldly gazed at him without uttering a word for a long time. What's your relationship with the Long family? Why didn't they kill you when you barged into the Dragon Clan's sacred grounds? Mo Lian suddenly asked. When Ding Yun heard this, he casually glanced at the man and snorted. Take a guess. Long Huan's explanation was that the state advisor had barged into the Dragon Clan's sacred grounds and had been detained. This should be true. But now, Ding Yun was able to walk out of the dungeon without permission. Therefore, there must be something that they didn't know about. Long Huan looked at Ding Yun with a complicated gaze and sighed. He turned to Mo Lian and said, Crown Prince, you may not know, but this young Master Ding is actually, why are you capturing me? Let me go. Let me go. How dare you be so impudent in the land of the Wangchuan tribe? A sharp female voice suddenly interrupted Long Huan, causing him to frown. This voice was so sharp that it almost pierced everyone's eardrums. It was extremely uncomfortable to listen to. The purple forest guards brought forward a woman who was struggling with all her might and screaming in anger. Bai Ning Shuang's hairpins were disheveled, her makeup was dull, and her crimson robes were wrinkled. She was in a sorry state. Behave yourself. One of the purple forest guards gave her a heavy slap on the back of her shoulder, causing Bai Ning Shuang to squeal. Noisy. Arbor frowned in displeasure. Crown Prince Mo glanced at him coldly, and the purple forest guard punched Bai Ning Shuang's back forcefully. Madam, Bai cried out in shock. She lost her balance and fell to the ground. She was in so much pain that she couldn't speak. Bai Ning Shuang struggled to get up, but someone stepped on her back and pinned her down. She angrily raised her head and stared coldly at Mo Lian and the others. She said angrily, "You dare?" Mo Lian's gaze shifted as he coldly observed from the sidelines without saying anything. The purple forest guard had a good understanding of his master's personality. Even the slightest of glances would be immediately understood. Without another word, the long sword in his hand slashed towards Bai Ning Shuang's neck.
Clang.
A curved blade spirit artifact that was spinning through the air abruptly collided with the purple forest guard's long sword, instantly parrying his sword strike. Arbor turned to look. Long Qian came with a group of a few hundred mermaids with a cold expression. Arbor subconsciously raised his hand and touched the little white snake coiled around his wrist. A pair of cold and emotionless eyes stared coldly at Long Qian, and there wasn't the slightest trace of warmth in them. Everyone listen to my order. The little stoic ordered icily. Here. Those who stop me will be killed without mercy. Yes. Long Qian's eyes narrowed slightly. Arbor raised her hand and summoned the thunderclap sword. The spinning barb gently slid through the air. A sharp light flashed past Bai Ning Shuang's eyes. After a blood-curdling scream, Bai Ning Shuang reached out with a trembling hand and held her bloodshot eyes. She screamed in terror and panic.
You.
A trace of disbelief flitted across Long Qian's solemn face. She couldn't help but size up the little girl in white clothes who was as cold as ice. In her body, he could really see a trace of his daughter Long Qian back then. However, it was just a trace. The little girl wasn't Long Qian. She didn't have Long Qian's good temper. Chapter 4373. Unlike Long Qian's patience, this little girl was very calculative. Whenever someone offended her, she would take revenge on the spot. It seemed impossible for her to hold her breath and endure it in secret. Long Qian took a deep breath and looked down at Bai Ning Shuang, who was kneeling by Arbor's feet with her hair in a mess. Now that you've punished her, can you hand her over to me? Emolian couldn't help but sneer. Do you think it's that easy? The long sword in the purple forest guard's hand pressed down on Bai Ning Shuang's shoulder, causing her to bend over. Long Qian said coldly, Bai Ning Shuang was the one who made the first move. She didn't think it through and did something wrong. However, the two of you have already punished her. She lost her eyes, so let's end this here. Emolian stared at Long Qian coldly. Who do you think you are? What kind of tone and attitude are you using to talk to me? You don't have the right to decide how to end this. I have the right to decide. Long Qian's breath was stuck in her chest, and she didn't know what to say. Long Qian quickly stepped forward and said in a low voice, Forget Chuan invited the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess here to form the Celestial Fate Legion. At this moment, we should be united against the enemy instead of fighting among ourselves. Arbor kicked Bai Ning Shuang, who was in a pitiful state, to Long Qian's feet. He turned around and said coldly, I'm tired. Lisha Island is ready. You can go there at any time. Long Qian let out a sigh of relief. Bai Ning Shuang stood up, while trembling. Suddenly, she stood up and grabbed the green scepter in the old madam's hand. Long Qian's eyes turned cold. Just as she was about to scold her, Bai Ning Shuang turned around with the scepter in her hand and slapped the fist-sized black pearl on top of the scepter. Long Qian's eyes changed. She couldn't help but yell, "Bai Ning Shuangyu." An ink-colored halo of light instantly emerged from the scepter. Then, the brilliant light shone brightly and covered everyone on the scene. Everyone was bewildered as they looked up at the inky brilliance that had enveloped the entire realm. The merpeople, the Purple Forest Guards, the Phoenix clan members, and even Mo Lian, Mu Xingchen, and the others in Arbor were all enveloped in the dim light of the night. They looked around in confusion. They thought that the ink light would attack them indiscriminately. However, in reality, no one felt any discomfort in their bodies. They felt as if this domain was natural, and it was just blocking this space. What's going on? Feng Zhongfei looked around blankly. Why are you protecting us? Do you want to fight? Feng Zhongqing raised his hand to stop the group of Feng brothers who were ready to make a move. He looked at Mo Lian with a puzzled gaze. While holding Qiao Mu's small hand, Mo Lian was in the midst of vigilantly inspecting their surroundings when he suddenly felt the little fellow's small hand tighten around his. He looked down and saw that his JoJo's face was slightly pale. Large beads of sweat rolled down from her temples. Her slender body was swaying as if she couldn't even stand properly. JoJo. Everyone saw that she was different from usual and quickly gathered around her. Arbor felt that the Divine Ruins realm was abnormal, and he couldn't suppress it. His body swayed a few times. Mo Lian reached out to hold him, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 4374. JoJo. Mo Lian was greatly alarmed, and her expression changed drastically. JoJo. Hu Shichen, Mu Xingchen, and the others' expressions also changed. What was going on? Everyone was normal, but JoJo was the only one who became like this? So Bai Ning Shuang's actions just now were targeted at JoJo. She touched the black pearl on the old madam's scepter. Everyone supported JoJo in a flurry, and their gazes all turned to Long Qian. They discovered that Long Qian's face was also deathly pale. She cut her fingertip and dripped a thick drop of blood onto the black pearl, as if she was trying her best to suppress something. However, she couldn't suppress it at all. Long Qian's fingers were bleeding, and she tightly pressed down on the black pearl on the scepter. Her body trembled along with the trembling black pearl. Grandmother! Long Shangyun and Long Qian shouted at the same time. With a wave of their hands, they led countless mermen forward and used their spiritual energy to assist the old madam in suppressing the restless black pearl. Pfft! Arbor spat out blood again, and her body involuntarily slid to the ground. Prince Mo panicked and reached out to grab her waist, hugging her as she slid down. He propped himself up on one knee and said in a trembling voice, "JoJo, JoJo." Arbor felt the ruins of God ripple heavily, and even her conscience began to tremble in pain. She lowered her head with difficulty, and a flickering light secretly flowed in the depths of the little stoic's scarlet eyes. Younger sister, Mu Xingchen shouted in panic. Everyone followed the little stoic's gaze and simultaneously looked down, only to see a white luster flickering at her lower abdomen. The strange thing was that the ball of light rolled through her body inch by inch. When it reached her abdomen and reached her heart, it was as if it was about to roll through her slender body and fly out of her mouth. Mo Lian and Hu Shichen were the quickest to react. They raised their hands and sent 2 bursts of sacred energy over, stopping the ball of white light from flying out. Mo Lian's fingertips moved slightly as she sent out several strands of saint power into Arbor's body. Hu Shichen quickly helped her suppress her restless conscience. While everyone was busy dealing with Qiao Qiao's strange behavior, they heard Long Qian's suppressed roar from the other side. Hold on. However, Long Shangyun, Long Shi, and the others could not suppress the black pearl at all. Holding on for 2 minutes was already their limit, following which, he was violently sent flying by a violent force. Long Qian spat out a mouthful of blood and collapsed onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, the black pearl suddenly transformed into a long black shadow that spiraled in the air and emitted a furious roar that shook the heavens and the earth. The black dragon claw suddenly came down from the sky and went straight for JoJo's heart. That gigantic dragon claw exuded an incomparably terrifying pressure. The pupils of Mo Lien, Hejichen Muxingchen, and the others shrank. The pressure of a saint beast? Such a terrifying aura. I'm afraid it's the aura of a middle-mature stage holy beast, right? A golden light flashed and disappeared. Seventh Yen, who had clearly grown a lot taller and had a much more mature face, suddenly jumped out of Prince Mo's space. He raised his hand and transformed it into a dragon claw, blocking a black dragon claw that swooped down at him. The youth frowned and grunted. While blocking the black dragon claw, he was forced to retreat several steps. Little Seven, come back. Emolien's low and magnetic voice rang out. He did not summon Seventh Yen just now. It was this brat who jumped out first to block the attack when he saw the situation was critical. Chapter 4375. However, although Xiao-Qi had already entered the late stage of puberty, she couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as a mature holy beast. That black dragon was merely a translucent soul. Even Xiao-Qi was barely able to withstand its attack. If it was allowed to fully recover, everyone here would be in deep trouble. At this time, Mo Lien and Jichun had already completely understood. What was on Long Qian's staff wasn't a black pearl at all. Instead, it was a sealing pearl. This black dragon had been sealed inside the black pearl by someone using a special method. Presumably, many years had passed since then. It was currently in a translucent soul state. However, it was clear that as long as it absorbed enough holy power, it could still slowly recover its physical form. Arbor was half flying in Mo Lien's arms. She couldn't make a sound. She hung her head listlessly, allowing the blood at the corner of her mouth to drip onto the sandy ground. Jojo. Mo Lien hurriedly lifted her up a little and reached out to support her head. At the same time, the Peony Fairy, Little Taisui, and the others had already flown out of Paradise Planet. Without another word, they rushed to He-Chen's side and began to fight with the black dragon. Bai Ning Shuang laughed heartily. She reached out to touch the air in front of her and repeatedly shouted, "How is it? How is it?" Did the thing inside already kill that stoic face? Long Shangyun covered her shoulder that had almost left after being patted. She glared angrily at Bai Ning Shuang. Second aunt, did you hit your head on the ground? How could you open grandmother's restriction seal? Ha, ha, ha. Bai Ning Shuang turned a deaf ear to Long Shangyun's angry shout. She reached out to touch the air in front of her, wanting to grab someone and ask about the current situation. Second aunt. Long Shangyun's expression changed. Just as she called out the words, second aunt, she saw the translucent black dragon rush down. The dragon coiled its body and swept its tail heavily. Bai Ning Shuang, who was lying on the ground, was sent flying by the black dragon's tail and heavily smashed into the ground. How could her body withstand a holy beast's attack? He didn't even manage to catch his breath before he breathed his last. Second aunt. Long Shangyun exclaimed in shock. Suddenly, she felt her arm lighten. She turned around and saw Long Huan pulling her back several steps until they reached a safe place. Brother, what about second aunt? Long Huan shook his head helplessly. She opened the black dragon's seal without permission. I'm afraid this matter will not end well. Long Shangyun turned around and patted the black light barrier. She hammered it twice and clenched her fists. We can't get out. Huh? Sacred beast barrier. Do you think anyone can get out? At this moment, everyone had already helped old Madame Long Qian to the sibling side. Grandmother, how are you? Long Qian shook his head slightly and coughed twice. His gaze turned towards Arbor and he roared, Mu Qiaoyu. Quickly summon it to suppress it.
Jojo?
Jojo. Mo Lien saw that she kept her head down and felt inexplicably uneasy. He held her waist and reached out to lift her chin slightly. As soon as he saw her, he was shocked. His Jojo's eyes were red with blood. It was as if he couldn't see anything alive in his eyes.
Jojo?
Mo Lien was stunned and wanted to hug her. However, the little girl pushed his arm away. She stood up with a blank and cold expression. Her gaze landed on the black dragon that was roaring in the sky. In her tumultuous conscience, there was a terrifying fluctuation. Chapter 4376. If she could look inside herself right now, she would definitely be able to see that the snake sculpture in her inner world was cracking apart inch by inch under the repeated fluctuations of her consciousness, revealing sections of black scales that were engraved with profound runes. When Long Qian saw her standing there in a daze without moving, she couldn't help but shout anxiously, "Mu Qiao, what are you waiting for? Hurry up!" Arbor's body suddenly trembled, and a huge wave of pressure suddenly emanated from her body, rushing toward the black dragon in midair.
Bam!
Seventh Yen pulled back his tail that had hit the black dragon and turned to look at his master's wife in surprise. This little girl's body actually emitted a trace of an ancient sacred beast's pressure. She had many sacred beasts around her, but most of them were sacred beasts in their growth stage. Compared to this half-soul sacred beast in front of her, they couldn't be compared at all. But now, the sacred beast's pressure that was seeping out of her body had an unprecedented sense of oppression. In the blink of an eye, a pitch-black dragon abruptly broke free from the snake sculpture and flew out of Qiao Mu's inner world to protect its master. It swiped its claw at the black dragon in midair. Roar! The merfolk stared dumbfoundedly at the three dragons that were fighting inside the sacred beast barrier. Their ferocious and terrifying power would occasionally hit one or two innocent merfolk passers-by, turning them into a pile of dust. Cries of agony came from behind Long Qian. All the merfolk felt that they were unlucky to be involved in a fight between three giant dragons. How unlucky must one be to experience such a thing and be deeply troubled by it? At this time, Hu Shurchen, little Tai Sui, and the others had already returned to Arbor's side. How is it? The crown prince had tried to get close to his wife countless times, but every time, he was pushed back by his little wife without any hesitation. Hu Shurchen looked up and saw that the crown prince's handsome face looked as if there was nothing left to live for. Stop fooling around. Her conscience should be in a mess right now, right? For some reason, the energy in her body is also in a mess. Let's calm down the divine energy in her veins first. Hu Shurchen tugged at Imo Lien and said, how could Imo Lien not know this in her heart? But even if she wanted to appease him, she had to get close to him. Jojo wouldn't even let him get close to him, which made him very anxious. Moreover, the blood-patterned black dragon that came out of Jojo's body was also very strange. Where did it come from? These people stayed in Qiao Qiao's star field every day. He knew very well what kind of holy beasts there were in the star field, and how many of them there were. But where did this dragon come from? Although the blood-patterned black dragon was a mature holy beast, it was a pity that it had just reached the early stages of maturity. If it joined forces with Shaoqi, they would be able to stop the brutal black dragon. But as time passed, it was hard to say. After all, no one knew how many years it had been asleep. Now that it had just broken out of the seal of the sculpture, it had yet to fully adapt. Long Qian used her scepter to knock on the sacred beast barrier behind her with a deep frown. She abruptly turned to Qiao Mu and said, Mu Qiao, what are you still hesitating for? Why are you in a daze? Quickly summon that thing to deal with the black dragon. If the sacred beast realm is not broken, we will all be innocently affected. Hurry up and break it. Break it. The merpeople couldn't help but roar angrily. Long Qian's gaze was serious as he stared at Arbor, without blinking. The latter turned a deaf ear to the many complicated roars around him. His gaze only landed on the black dragon's half-soul that was roaring in the air. As if it was summoned by something, it opened its small mouth and a bright white pearl flew out. Chapter 4377. 10,000-year-old Shark Pearl. Shark Pearl, it's the 10,000-year-old Shark Pearl. It's the real 10,000-year-old Shark Pearl. The genuine 10,000-year-old Shark Pearl. The 10,000-year-old shark pearl that had been polished and tempered by countless seniors was actually in this little stoic's body.
Why?
This thought bubbled up in the merfolk's minds. It's Long Chuyen. It must be eldest Miss Long Chuyen who gave it to her. Long Qian, Long Shangyun, Long Qian, and all the mermaids were staring at the round jade bead in the air at the same time. Their eyes were burning with passion. Everyone stared fixedly at the round pearl that had abruptly leaped into the air, their emotions surging. They involuntarily straightened their bodies, wishing for nothing more than to pounce on it and grab it. Emo Lien, He Jiachen, and the others' eyes flickered. They glanced at the white pearl before looking back at Jojo. Arbor had completely lost consciousness at this time. He was only relying on his instincts to control the jade pearl to fly back and forth, up and down. The god power roaming in his body was wandering randomly through his meridians, and he couldn't control it for the time being. The little stoic's entire body shook. She clenched her fists and roared at the sky with all her might. She abruptly turned around, her eyes red as she coldly stared at the black dragon fighting in the air. That pure white pearl emitting a jade-colored light flew to the black dragon with a whoosh with a flick of her finger and fiercely tangled with it. White light exploded. As though this wasn't the pearl's first time fighting the black dragon, it was abnormally ferocious. She didn't care about the other two dragons and only focused on smashing the black dragon's head countless times. Every time it landed, it would cause the black dragon's half-soul to dim slightly. The black dragon roared, and its body flipped and smashed furiously in the air. The lightning it spat out attacked indiscriminately, instantly killing several merfolk. This sudden turn of events caused the merfolk to struggle out of their daze as though they had just woken up from a dream. They all cried out in alarm and dodged in all directions. "Hurry and open this barrier. We can't get out of the sacred beast barrier. Why do you talk so much nonsense?" The peony fairy sneered and waved the thunder pestle in her hand. "If you can't get out, then die." So much nonsense that it's annoying. One of the mermen glared at the peony fairy and said angrily, "How can you say that? If you don't have the ability, then shut up and wait for someone to save you. If you spout any more nonsense, this old lady will summon lightning to strike you to death right now." The merman immediately shrank back behind Long Hua, glaring at the peony fairy but not daring to say anything. "Mu Qiao stole our race's sacred artifact, the 10,000-year mermaid pearl," a merman said indignantly. "She should return it." "Yes, it should be returned." Emolien was already in a bad mood. Hearing those mermaids and mermen's nonsensical words, she coldly glanced at the crowd. When he smiled, his eyes seemed to sparkle like a sky full of stars. When he was incomparably cold, it made people feel fearful and timid. The merfolk who were hooting instantly froze on the spot when she glared at them. Their muttering voices also quieted down. "Get into formation," Mo Lien ordered coldly. A group of purple forest guards immediately stepped forward to protect the crown prince. They formed a formation and moved forward. The thousand-face shield instantly erected in front of them, protecting them from the indiscriminate attacks that the black dragon threw at them from time to time. Mo Lien beckoned with her hand, and 7th Yen immediately flew to her side. Chapter 4378. This black dragon was in a half-soul state, so their attacks were completely useless against its half-soul body. Everyone could only continuously use their spiritual energy to attack, but most of them were repelled by its enormous sacred power. They could barely move. Mo Lien stared coldly at the black dragon in front of her. With a wave of her hand, several pitch-black flames rustled down and flew onto the black dragon's body. Like exploding fireworks, they boisterously exploded on the black dragon's half-transparent soul body. The black dragon was originally about to flee like a rat after being beaten by the shark pearl. Now that it was immobilized by the pearl's light and struck by the sacred power that Emol Yen and the others flung over, its half-soul body became increasingly illusory and scattered, and it was on the verge of collapse. When the merfolk saw this, they instantly rushed forward while shouting and wrangling. "Hurry, It can't hold on any longer. Get ready. Get the sealing pearl ready and seal it again.
Ah.
As if struggling on its deathbed, the black dragon abruptly swooped down and spat out a mouthful of furious lightning at those clamoring merfolk. The impact immediately scattered the group, and the merfolk scrambled and wailed as they scattered. The shark pearl's jade-like and serene light enveloped the earth, emitting a sacred, flawless, and transparent light. At this moment, the black dragon that was firmly trapped by the light was roaring angrily as if it was extremely unresigned. Its eyes were wide open, and its tail flipped and swayed. The flawless white light pressed down on that black dragon's illusory body and wrapped it up in balls. Not good. The 10,000-year-old shark pearl is going to capture the black dragon. Clan leader. Clan leader. The merfolk shouted anxiously. What should we do now? What do you mean, what should we do? That shark pearl is our river of forgetfulness's sacred item to begin with, and the black dragon is also a suppressed guardian beast. Right. If the shark pearl captures the black dragon, then so be it. As long as the crown princess returns the shark pearl to us. Arbor, who was in the divine ruin realm, suddenly roared at the sky. At the same time, the shark pearl, which was bursting with sacred white light, abruptly contracted and swallowed the entire black dragon. It flew out with a whoosh and swiftly flew into the little stoic's mouth.
Chow chow.
Emolien and the rest turned pale with fright as they rushed over. However, a white light flashed in Xiao Mu's hand, and like a sudden clap of thunder, it carved out a deep ravine in front of her, blocking Emolien, Zhichun, and the others' footsteps. At this moment, Arbor seemed to have entered a berserk state. His eyes were red, and there was no one in his eyes. She turned her head around, her scarlet eyes filled with killing intent as she glared at the fearful merman in front of her. Long Qian's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly shouted, "Quick! Disperse!" At the same time, a thunderous sword might swept toward the mermaids with the terrifying power of lightning. The explosive force spread out in all directions, sending the few mermaids in the front row flying and crashing heavily onto the ground. They clutched their chests and vomited blood. "Joe, Arbor!" Long, she shouted in shock. Young Master Ding's expression changed slightly, and he quickly flashed away. His eyes flickered, and he stopped to look in Arbor's direction. At this moment, the latter stopped to catch his breath and slightly raised his head, sweeping his cold gaze over Long Qian and the others. Long Qian's heart skipped a beat. Long Shi reflexively tightened his grip on the long sword in his hand and stuttered, "Co-cousin, calm down." Xiao Mu's eyes were blank as she wielded her sword. Wisps of water spiritual energy accumulated on her sword, and in a split second, it streaked through the air toward Long Qian and the others with an unstoppable momentum. Chapter 4379. Oh no, she can't control the shark pearl in her body. The power belonging to the shark pearl in her body is starting to go berserk. Scatter! Long Qian shouted, his old face instantly flushing red. Who would dare to clash head-on with the thunderclap sword? Horror flitted across their faces, and following Long Qian's angry shout, they hastily dodged in all directions. Thousands of thunderclaps galloped past like a magnificent army. At the bottom of the river of forgetfulness, the entire Long clan's residence was greatly shaken. The commoner merfolk outside the spirit realm also more or less felt the turbulent waves rolling above their heads, and they hastily found a place to hide. At this time, the little stoic stood alone in front of the thousands of ravines at the bottom of the sea, her body emitting a dazzling white light. Her fists were tightly clenched, and her bones creaked. She suddenly roared into the sky, and a terrifying force exploded from her body. Everywhere the white light covered, flowers and trees shattered into fine powder. The holy beast barrier that had been set up by the black dragon also completely shattered with a bang. Emolien, Heartwarming, and the others couldn't even get close, let alone the others. Everyone simultaneously raised their hands to block the dazzling white light in front of them. When the white light finally scattered, they saw the little stoic with her back facing them. Her shoulders trembled weakly, and she suddenly spat out another mouthful of blood. Her body weakly slid to the ground. With a clang, the thunderclap sword in her hand fell to the ground without her noticing. Jojo. Crown Prince Mo's heart was on the verge of shattering. With a flash, he flew across a deep crevice in front of him and caught her falling body. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal, Holy Sun Mi Yen, Little Tai Sui, Mu Xingchen, and the others also rapidly surrounded them. When they looked down, they saw the little fellow's eyes were tightly shut, her long eyelashes were trembling, her lips were tightly pursed, and her face was as pale as a sheet. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal's heart sank, and his breathing quickened. He hastily grabbed Emolian. Quick, quick, suppress the shark pearl in her godly ruins first. The shark pearl was so powerful that it was only temporarily stabilized by the combined efforts of all the Transcendence realm experts present. Long Qian supported herself with a long staff as she struggled to walk towards Emolian and the others. She said anxiously, "We have to think of a way to get the shark pearl out. She can't control her body at all." Previously, it was Chu Yun who took the initiative to seal the mermaid pearl in her body. When the power of the mermaid pearl awakens, her body will not be able to withstand it, nor will she be able to control it. It must be taken out immediately. What a load of nonsense. Emolian and Ji-Chen were both enraged. They each threw out a fire spirit and a wood spirit. The powerful Saint Power rushed towards the old woman who could not stand steadily. "Grandmother!" Long, she exclaimed from behind. Long Qian's eyes narrowed, and she quickly turned around to dodge. She barely dodged a fire spirit when the wood spirit viciously hit her in the chest.
Pooh.
The old woman spat out a mouthful of blood, but her gaze was still extremely stubborn. "What I said is true. If you leave the mermaid pearl in her body, it will be like leaving a Saint Power pearl that will explode at any given time. You speak as if it's true. Who are you trying to fool?" Feng Zhongfei could not help but say angrily. If that black dragon sealing pearl was not suddenly broken by someone, why would the mermaid pearl lose control on the spot in order to suppress it? Why are we wasting our breath on them? "Let's go," the peony fairy said angrily. Emolian carried Arbor with both hands. After taking 2 steps, she turned around and looked at Long Qian coldly. She said in a low voice, "You knew about it from the start, didn't you?" Chapter 4380. So this time, you did everything possible to lure her back, not because clan leader Long has 1 foot in the grave and is in a hurry to see her granddaughter. It's because you want this shark pearl. Emolian's breathing was labored, and she did her best to suppress the boiling fury in her heart. When she spoke, her voice was laced with grief and anger, so gloomy that it was heartbreaking. "The dragon clan of Wang Chuan is truly disgusting." The peony fairy, Fairy Ginkgo, and the others glared fiercely at the dragon clan members before hastily following her. Long Qian coughed dully as she stared emotionlessly in the direction they left. "Grandmother, grandmother." Long Qian called out twice and couldn't resist letting out a long sigh. "Grandmother, why are you doing this?" Young Master Ding suddenly chuckled. He turned around and waved his hand, laughing loudly as he left. "The dragon clan of Wang Chuan is truly disgusting."
Ha 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 ha.
Long Qian angrily glared at his back and clutched her aching heart. "Let's go back first." Emolian was extremely fast. She carried Arbor back to Yun Court in a flash and placed him on the bed. Jojo was unconscious, and her Dantian, Godly Ruins realm, and conscious were both sealed, so she naturally couldn't communicate with Qiuqiu. "Water's here. Water's here. Give it to me." Emolian took the half-wet handkerchief from Fairy Ginkgo and carefully wiped the blood from the corners of the little stoic's lips. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Everyone, disperse first." Ma Shurchen turned around and glanced at Feng Chongqing and the others. "Don't crowd around here. Go back and prepare. When Jojo wakes up, we'll leave this place. Mo Lien raised her small hand and wiped the bloodstains on her fingers. The blood on her hand was rarely other people's. It was all blood that she spat out. It was very glaring and gripped one's heart. Jojo's small face looked much more fragile with this injury. Thin veins could be seen under her jade-colored skin. Mo Lien threw the handkerchief into the water basin and reached out to help her up with trembling hands. He pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. His breathing was shallow as he lowered his head and leaned against her neck. If Arbor was awake, he would definitely be able to feel the slight trembling of her body, as well as the unhurried tears that slid to the bottom of her collarbone. The venerable peach blossom immortal looked in through the window. He reached out to stop Mu Xingqian, who was about to enter, and said softly, "Let them stay for a while. Mo Lien's heart is aching and she's blaming herself. Give him time to slowly recover. No matter what others say, it's useless." Mu Xingqian glanced at them worriedly and nodded with a sigh. Mo Lien continued to take care of Qiao Qiao until it was late into the night, and all was quiet. He stayed by her side, changing a clean and moist handkerchief to cover her forehead from time to time. He held her small hand tightly, listened to her murmur lotus, and answered her Jojo anytime, anywhere. However, at this time, Arbor was already in a daze. His entire body felt heavy, as if he was drifting around on a small boat with nowhere to call home. She didn't know where she was, but she knew where her heart was going. Mo Lien, where are you?" She screamed anxiously in her heart. She heard a slow and low voice, as if it came from the faraway sky, saying intermittently, "Jojo, don't be afraid. I'm always by your side. Always, always." She seemed to feel his warm lips on her hand, warm and sweet. Chapter 40, 381. But her body seemed to be grabbed by a strange force, and she had no choice but to follow the force of the fall. She kept falling, and falling it was as if she had sunk into a boundless stream. Sinking, sinking, sinking endlessly. Wouldn't it have been better if you had boarded the ship? Why did you come back? Why did you come back? What right does a good-for-nothing like you, who can't even take care of yourself, have to stay by young master's side? Ridiculous. The woman questioned, and the sound of a whip pierced through the air, landing heavily on a frail body. Arbor stood in the corridor, as if he was looking at someone else's remaining life. His eyes flickered, and he looked on expressionlessly. He lowered his head to look at his transparent hands, which had turned into a wisp of soul, as if floating into an endless abyss of memories. So my previous life seemed to be a bit more miserable than what I remembered.
Bang!
The door of the room was suddenly kicked open. The second young master didn't have time to tie up his hair, and his black hair was messy as he broke through the door. Looking at the situation, he must have hurriedly put on his clothes after receiving the news, and quickly rushed to this room to save someone. "Sure, Yongqian, who told you to hit her?" A ruthless slap landed heavily on second Miss Shi's cheek. It immediately caused her white and tender skin to turn red. He took a few steps back from the slap and almost hit the cabinet door behind him. "Qin Xian, you actually hit me for this little pet? So what if I hit you?" "I'm still waiting to be killed." In his rage, the second young master didn't have time to think and reached out to summon a long sword with white light lingering around it from his conscience. Second young master, second young master." Several students immediately rushed forward, stopping him and cupping their hands. "Second young master, you can't. Second Miss Shi's father sought refuge with our Qin estate. How can we kill his daughter? Will it disappoint everyone? Get out of the way." Qin Xian angrily pushed aside the students and quickly stepped forward. He didn't care about the blood and dirt and reached out to pick up the dying woman on the ground. "Xiao Qiao, Xiao Qiao?" The woman who was picked up by him stared at him with lifeless eyes. Her body trembled slightly, and a large amount of blood gushed out from her mouth. It was obvious that her internal organs were injured, and she was severely whipped. "Xiao Qiao, don't be afraid. You will get better. You will definitely get better." Qin Xian's voice trembled. She kicked the disciple beside her, almost hysterical. What are you standing there for? Why aren't you calling Ouyang-su over? With a wave of his hand, Omega Kotoku took out a few pills from his inner world and stuffed them all into the woman's mouth. Qinqing. Scram. Omega Kotoku mercilessly kicked away Shi Yongqian, who was walking towards him, and walked out with her in his arms. Arbor watched them from the porch, then turned and followed the anxious second son back to his room. Xiao Qiao. Qin Xian placed the dying woman on the bed and gently held her hand. She said softly, "If you want to cry, just cry. Don't hold it in." Arbor's soul floated forward and obediently sat on the small stool beside the bed. His clear and cold eyes reflected the pale and helpless face of the woman on the bed. Even though she was severely injured, she still didn't make a sound. She didn't even blink. "Young master, alchemist Ouyang-su is here. Don't talk nonsense.
Come in quickly."
Arbor turned his head and saw a man in simple but elegant white robes, with long hair tied into a crown, hurriedly enter the room with a medicine chest. Chapter 4382. Following behind him was a black-clothed man with tied hair. He had a brilliant smile and handsome features that she found somewhat familiar. Arbor sat on the small stool and involuntarily glanced at that person a few more times. Ouyang-su. Dugaling, greetings to young sir. The two of them cupped their hands in greeting with graceful bearing, truly a pair of fine young masters in this chaotic world. Arbor suddenly had a flash of inspiration and instantly recalled who this Dugaling was. Sir Jojo had once been intercepted by young Sir Omega Kotoku and his entourage beside Duchun River. Among them was the second young master's disciple called Ling. He disguised himself as a woman and tricked Jojo, but his identity was subsequently exposed by Duanyu. So it was him. Arbor couldn't help but be a bit dazed. It turned out that she had met so many people at this time in her previous life. Young Sir Omega Kotoku did his best to suppress the raging fury in his heart and bellowed at Ouyang-su, who was behind him, "Stop blabbering and come take a look." Ouyang-su sat down by the bed, and Arbor's soul could only avoid him. "Miss Chow, let me take your pulse," Ouyang-su said softly as he glanced at her. As usual, he saw her unperturbed and serene gaze. Those pitch-black eyes were filled with mockery, without the slightest desire to live. A moment later, Ouyang-su stood up and gracefully bowed to the second young master. "Young sir, let's talk outside. Her condition is very bad," Ouyang-su whispered to young Sir Omega Kotoku in the corridor. He involuntarily cast a glance inside the window and sighed softly. "Miss Chiao's heart is set on death and has no desire to live. After being struck by the purple firmament lightning dragon previously, 2 of her ribs were broken and haven't healed yet. Now that second Miss Shi's heavy whip has worsened her injuries, this subordinate, don't waste your breath." The second young master's suppressed roar interrupted Ouyang-su. "You must save her, you must. I don't care what method you use, I want her alive. Young sir, this subordinate will certainly do his best. However, her depression is not beneficial to her injuries. It's best if she can release it, hey?" Arbor frowned and looked coldly at Dugaling, who always liked to pretend to be a transvestite. Dugaling had stolen her aunt and was talking to her previous life. "You're so young. Do you really want to die? A person must have the will to live in order to have hope in the future." Dugaling looked at her with a smile. "You're still so young. Why do you always want to seek death? Think about it. It's so good to be alive. You can drink wine, eat meat, and have endless spring flowers. It's enough for you to appreciate. Oh, of course. The world today can't see thriving greenery, but there has to be some hope. Who knows, we might see it in the future, Dugaling Omega Kotoku entered the room and said in a deep voice, Okay. I'll go. Dugaling felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly got up and ran out. Second Qin unhurriedly and lightly walked to the bedside with a head of black hair that hung down to his waist. She reached out and placed a very old doll on her chest. She wanted to touch her hair, but her fingers curled up and stopped. Last time it was my fault. I lied to you and said that I tore it apart, causing you to be heartbroken and have nightmares. I know I didn't treat you well in the past, but in the future, I'll change, okay? People can't always look back on the past. They have to look forward. Omega Kotoku stood by the bed and looked down at her. Can you trust me this time? Chapter 40, 383. Arbor's eyes moved, and her gaze landed on the old doll. This was the doll that her mother had given her in her past life, and she had secretly given it to Shaolin. She remembered that when Shaolin died in her past life, she was still holding on to this doll. After that, when she was collecting her sister's body, she had kept this doll by her side. Now that she suddenly saw this doll, Arbor couldn't help but get closer to it, wanting to take a closer look. Was this real? Her transparent fingers passed through the doll's head, but she didn't grab anything. After all, she was just a spirit. How could she grab anything? Arbor lowered her head and saw that she was silently crying on the bed. She didn't make a single sound, but she could see the tears rolling down her cheeks. This feeling was really strange. It was as if she was watching someone else's tragic life. She wanted to reach out and hug the person who was crying silently. She wanted to pat her head and comfort her so that she wouldn't cry anymore. So, I was actually this depressed when I cried in my past life. She didn't even make a single sound, as if she would alarm someone if she made a sound. She just laid there and cried silently. She looked at the gauze above her head with a cold expression. Arbor didn't feel good about it. So, I cried a lot in my past life. As she thought about it, her gaze landed on the bed. She looked at her past life and let out a long sigh. Suddenly, her gaze froze as it landed on the stomach of her past life. He could clearly see a ball of something emitting a faint white light. Yes, it's the 10,000-year-old mermaid pearl in my body. Arbor pondered for a moment and thought to herself, did I have the 10,000-year-old mermaid pearl in my body in my past life? That's right. Based on what Long Qian and the others said, the 10,000-year-old mermaid pearl was given to her by her mother. That meant that she had this pearl in her past life. But why didn't she know anything about this pearl in her current life? Did she purposely seal it away, or did she not want to remember anything? If she had a physical body, Arbor would definitely break out in cold sweat, because she realized that she seemed to have peeped into some profound mysteries buried deep in her heart. She seemed to know something. As far as his eyes could see, the 10,000-year mermaid pearl was emitting a gentle light that kept swaying in his previous life's body. When Omega Kotoku entered, the light slowly subsided. The soul that was wandering in Arbor had been wandering in front of his previous life for the past few days like a spirit behind his back. That second young master came to see her almost every day. This made Arbor feel very strange. Did she really lose a lot of her memories after she self-destructed? At least, she had never remembered this part before. It had almost become a habit for the second young master to visit her every day. It was as if he had changed into a different person. Suddenly, he was very nice to her. However, in her previous life, she was still the same. Usually, she would only listen to him quietly and never interact with anyone. Ouyang-su would come to check her pulse every afternoon. In the afternoon, Omega Kotoku would push her out to bask in the sun and get some fresh air. The whip wounds on her body were slowly getting better. One day, Arbor saw her fingers moving on the side of the bed. She couldn't help but widen her eyes in shock. How could this be? Arbor thought to herself. In the past, her limbs were all broken and she couldn't even move a finger. Why was it happening now? It wasn't an illusion or an illusion. Her fingers really moved. Chapter 40, 384. This is for you. A pitch-black ring was rudely tossed onto her head. A 15 to 16-year-old youth in black poked his head out of the window and snorted. He shouted at the person who was half lying on the bed in a daze, I whipped you before, so master whipped me 10 times. We're even now. That youth retracted his head from under the window and didn't wait for her reaction for a long time, so he suddenly poked his head back. Seeing that she was half lying there without moving, he simply flipped over and jumped in through the window. "Why aren't you saying anything?" He stomped to the bedside and glanced at her irritably, nagging, "Actually, it's all your fault. If you didn't suddenly bite Master's finger like you wanted nothing more than to bite it off, why would I have smacked you like that? Hey, you're not a mute. Why aren't you saying anything?" The youth couldn't help but feel exasperated when he saw that the other party didn't react at all after talking for a long time. The little stoic was still sitting on the small stool beside the bed, sizing up the youth in front of her. Could this be the sacred beast purple firmament lightning dragon's transformation? Arbor pondered for a moment and felt that he should have guessed the truth. Was there such a scene in the past? Why did this purple firmament lightning dragon look so dumb? It could be paired with 7th Yen, that little rascal. They were both tsundere. Could it be that the attributes of dumb dragons were roughly the same? Seeing that she didn't utter a word for a long time, the youth was so angry that he directly picked up the ring he threw at her. He forcefully pulled her hand over and roughly put the ring on. "I'm telling you, this defensive sacred weapon was forged from my scales. It's very strong. In the future, don't mention being smacked once by me. Even if I smacked you 100 times, nothing would happen to you. I'll guarantee your safety. Why is your face so stoic? I'm giving you a defensive sacred weapon, so why are you so grief-stricken? You should be smiling, you know." "How about smiling?" The youth bent down, and the long black hair trailing behind his head swayed lightly as he moved his head back and forth. "What are you two doing?" The little stoic turned around expressionlessly and saw young Master Omega Kotoka standing at the door with a solemn expression, his cold and severe gaze gazing at the two people inside the room. The youth blinked and looked back at the Omega Kotoku with an uneasy expression. "Master, get out." Omega Kotoku glanced at him, and the latter quickly ran out of the door. The young man really didn't know why his master's gaze had suddenly become so cold. What did he do? Arbor could tell that the second young master was not in a good mood. When he walked to the bedside and sat down, Arbor could clearly feel that at this moment, he really wanted to shrink back. Her fingers suddenly moved, probably with all the strength she could muster in her life, and finally she lifted 2 of them and touched the back of his hand. Second young Master Chin was instantly stupefied and lowered his head to look at her fingers. Jojo, your hand?" He hurriedly stood up and shouted, "Quick, get Oh Young-soo here." "Young Master, Mrs. Condition has really taken a turn for the better," Oh Young-soo also said in pleasant surprise. But it was really strange. He was very familiar with Miss Chiao's condition. The meridians in her limbs had been broken for many years. Even if he wanted to save them, it was impossible for them to improve in the short term without finding those god-rank medicinal herbs. Although he had been using medicine on her, the medicine shouldn't have taken effect so quickly. Chapter 4385. Arbor realized that she was recovering faster and faster in her previous life. She had originally been like a withered weed, but now under a strange power, her body was inexplicably recovering. Arbor even felt a little scared. It was as if there was something she didn't want to think about, but it was about to be revealed in front of her. What could it be? Arbor clenched her fists nervously. She looked down and saw that her soul seemed to be a little faint. She couldn't shake her hand smoothly. 2 months later, her previous life could finally walk. Looking at her struggling to walk, Arbor's heart was filled with mixed feelings. She looked at her deeply. The soul had no tears. If it wasn't for that, her face would have been wet with tears by now. So, it was so difficult for me to stand up in my previous life. I actually forgot everything about the past. I don't know if it's because I denied my past too much. It's too painful, and I want to forget everything. In a person's life, there were too many things that they wanted to remember and didn't want to remember. Maybe she just remembered a lot of things. Xiaomu followed her outside. She watched as she staggered to and fro with the crutch in her hand, trudging outside step by step with great difficulty. Arbor wanted to reach out and help her. She wanted to help support her previous life, who was miserable and unwilling to accept her fate. Maybe, at that time, she only needed one person and one pair of hands to help her. Xiaomu stopped her fluttering steps and gazed at her back. Her previous life used her hands to push the door frame and moved out inch by inch. She stood in front of the door and looked up at the sky. She didn't know what she was looking at, but she didn't move her eyes away for a long time. Jojo? Why did you come out by yourself? The second son walked through the door towards her. His footsteps were hurried and fast. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of her. Arbor could clearly feel that the body leaning against the door frame trembled slightly. She still didn't like to come into contact with this person. She suppressed the discomfort in her heart and forced herself to look at him. What's wrong? I want to go somewhere. It was the first time he had heard her voice since he came to Arbor. Her voice was hoarse and dry, as if it had been run over by a car twice. Yes, she remembered now. Her throat seemed to have been poisoned by second mixture. She didn't know if it had recovered after that. The teleportation array flashed and several people walked out of it. They were stunned when they saw what was in front of them. Low slopes, desolate tombs, and luxuriant weeds spread for 10 miles. A few crows that had lost their feathers were perched on the branches. They were not afraid when they saw people coming. They only cawed as they walked. Arbor floated behind them like a spirit. Looking at the desolate graveyard, he couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate. She seemed to recognize this place. It was dilapidated and desolate, like a boundless sea of bitterness from hell. There wasn't the slightest bit of greenery, only withered grass, broken trees, wild graves, and black crows. It seemed to be the place where she had tidied up Shaolin-er's body. It seemed like he had moved the remains of his mother and brother here, as well. Therefore Arbor stood there in a daze. That feeling of wanting to cry, but not being able to shed tears was simply too terrible. In her previous life, she moved through the desolate graveyard bit by bit, found a place to return, and sat down. The sky was filled with paper money, like snow. Arbor's heart ached. She only heard her murmur in a low voice, I haven't come here for 3 years. Chapter 4386. To all of you, Arbor saw her pick up her wine cup and take a sip before sprinkling the rest of the wine on the graveyard beneath her feet. The second young master's breathing seemed to have become erratic. He stood nearby and watched for a long time. Ever since she returned from worshipping the graveyard, her previous life seemed to have become even quieter. She was very cooperative with the treatment every day. She ate whatever Ouyang Su told her to eat and took whatever medicine he told her to take. At night, a faint white light would emit from her abdomen. At this point, Arbor had no choice but to take this shark pearl seriously. It was a fact that she had always been unwilling to think about and had always been unwilling to admit. It was the shark pearl. It really was this 10,000-year-old shark pearl. At this moment, she should understand why the wounds on her body would often disappear miraculously. It was the effect of the shark pearl. After she entered the water, she was like a fish in water, as if she had become one with the water spirit of heaven and earth. This was also the effect of the shark pearl. She recalled the many inconceivable things that had happened to her in the past. Arbor made a bold conjecture. The shark pearl should have 3 main effects. First, it could fuse with her body into water. The shark pearl could allow her to breathe freely in water, and it wouldn't be strenuous for her to run and walk. Second, it had astonishing recovery abilities. Thinking back, what was Lady Holy Water's thought when she first came into contact with holy water at the Holy Water sect? This little girl is so fresh. Her body is filled with the moisturizing taste that Lady Holy Water likes the most. What did that mean? Lady Holy Water could sense the abundant water spirit energy in her body the moment she came into contact with her. The shark pearl was born to melt water in all forms and was not inferior to holy water. Hence, the reason why Lady Holy Water targeted her and wanted her to become a host wasn't because of how talented she was, but because of the 10,000-year-old shark pearl in her body. When Lady Holy Water first saw her, She wanted to get close to the shark pearl. However, this 10,000-year-old shark pearl had been sealed in her previous life. It wasn't until she experienced countless tribulations and broke through her body's limits that the seal loosened and slowly started to take effect. However, it was different in this life. In this life, the seal on the shark pearl became unstable when she came into contact with Lady Holy Water at the sect. Holy Water was attracted to the shark pearl, so how could the shark pearl not be attracted to holy water? Hence, the seal on her shark pearl should have already started to loosen back then at Seekong Planet's Jiazhong base. She was slightly injured when she exploded the Mystic Beast Forest Mystic Realm core, but the shark pearl healed her on the same day. After that, this inexplicable healing ability remained. In the past, he could not figure it out no matter how much he thought about it. Now that he thought about it from the start to the end, wasn't this the recovery ability of the shark pearl? No wonder the little tree said that even the life force of the wood spirit could not recover so quickly. How powerful was the 10,000-year-old mermaid pearl? In her previous life, this 10,000-year mermaid pearl had truly healed her limbs and body at this time, mending her damaged body, allowing her to slowly stand up, walk outside to look at the sunlight outside. The third effect of the merman's pearl should be to automatically protect the host, expel ghosts, and purify all unclean things. So, even though she was able to use the ghost summoning talisman, she had never been able to see any ghostly spirits. No ghostly spirits were able to get close to her. This should be the reason. She still remembered that when she first entered the Divine Prefecture and stepped into the Milky Way, endless saint power surged towards her. At that time, it was the mermaid pearl that protected her from the saint power and activated its automatic defense. And now, she could cultivate on her own, even when she was sleeping. She was absorbing the specks of divine power around her without noticing anything. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.